Every single night, without choosing to, you step into another world. A world with its own landscapes, its own logic, its own cast of characters, assembled in seconds from nothing while your body lies completely still. Scientists have spent decades trying to understand what happens there, and what they found is stranger, more beautiful, and more meaningful than anyone expected. Tonight, we're going to explore all of it. 100 fascinating things about the world of dreams, the science, the mysteries, and the quiet wonder of what your mind does every single night while you sleep. Get comfortable, let the day go, and let's begin. Hello there, and welcome to Dreamy Science Stories. Tonight, we are stepping into one of the most quietly mysterious places that every human being visits each and every night. Yet somehow, it remains one of the least understood corners of our existence. Tonight, we are exploring the world of dreams. Think for a moment about what happens as sleep gradually takes you. The noise of the day begins to soften. Your thoughts loosen, like a knot slowly coming undone. Your senses grow gentle at the edges. And then, without any effort at all, something else begins to take shape. A world assembles itself around you. Faces appear from nowhere. Landscapes stretch out in directions that don't quite follow the rules of the waking world. Entire stories unfold with their own logic, their own emotional weather, as if being written and performed at the very same moment by some quiet, hidden part of you. Dreams can feel like a puzzle with half the pieces missing, or like a mirror reflecting something you almost recognize. They carry scattered fragments of memory, flashes of pure imagination, and whispers of emotion that rise and fall without warning. Sometimes they lift you into flight. Sometimes they leave you puzzled by their strange vividness. And sometimes they dissolve so completely upon waking that you find yourself wondering whether they were ever there at all. If you enjoy slow, gentle explorations like this one, a subscription or a quiet comment means a great deal. It helps other curious minds find their way here. But for now, let the weight of the day drift softly into the background. Find a comfortable position, breathe slowly, and let a sense of wonder settle over you like a blanket on a cool, quiet evening. Let's begin. We still don't know exactly what dreaming is for. Of all the questions science has patiently pursued, few have proven as quietly stubborn as this one. Why do we dream? Human beings have been dreaming for as long as they have existed. Ancient civilizations built entire belief systems around dream symbolism. Temples were constructed in ancient Greece specifically so that people could sleep within their walls, hoping to receive visions in the night. And yet here we are, in an age of brain scanners and computational models of extraordinary complexity, and the precise reason the dreaming mind does what it does remains, in the deepest sense, unsettled. We have learned a great deal, of course. We understand sleep stages, brain rhythms, and the chemical changes that sweep through the mind across the night. But the fundamental question, the why, stays beautifully open. Some researchers believe dreams help consolidate memories, pressing a kind of save button on the events of the day. Others suggest dreams allow the brain to process difficult emotions in a safe, contained setting, so that by morning the sharpest edges of a hard experience feel slightly softer. There are also theories that dreaming serves as a simulation space, rehearsing responses to social tensions or imagined dangers. And then there is the creativity hypothesis, pointing to the countless artists and thinkers throughout history who found their most original ideas waiting for them in the dreaming hours. What is perhaps most interesting is that none of these explanations may be wrong. All of them might be true at different moments, serving different needs depending on a person's age, stress, and circumstances. What science can say with growing confidence is that dreaming is not meaningless noise. Something purposeful is happening in those quiet hours, even if its full shape remains, for now, just beyond our reach. Scientists have had two-way conversations with lucid dreamers. There is a discovery that, when you first encounter it, sounds more like the plot of a quiet, strange novel than a finding from a sleep laboratory. And yet it happened, documented carefully, repeated across multiple research groups in different countries. Scientists have had real conversations with people who were fully, deeply asleep and dreaming. To understand why this is so extraordinary, consider what sleep has always seemed to be: a sealed chamber, a state in which the mind turns so completely inward that the outside world becomes unreachable. The sleeping person is, in a sense, elsewhere, but a special kind of dreaming experience called lucid dreaming, the state in which the dreamer becomes aware, while still fully asleep, that they are dreaming, opened an unexpected door. Volunteers who had trained themselves in this skill agreed, before sleep, on a simple signaling code with the watching researchers. A specific pattern of deliberate eye movements would mean I am here, I am aware, I am dreaming right now. When lucidity arrived, they sent the signal. Researchers then introduced questions through soft sounds or gentle sensory cues, and the dreamers responded through prearranged eye movements or small facial twitches, all while the dream continued around them. In some trials, dreamers successfully solved simple arithmetic problems entirely from within the dream state. The exchanges were brief, more like passing signals across a great distance than any flowing conversation. But what they proved was profound. The sleeping brain is not entirely sealed from the world. Awareness can persist inside a dream, and information can move in both directions in real time. It remains one of the most quietly remarkable things that modern sleep science has produced. The scent of roses can make a nightmare gentler. Among all our senses, smell occupies a uniquely intimate corner of the brain. While sight and hearing travel through several relay stations before reaching the regions that process memory and emotion, scent connects almost directly to those deep structures. It is why a particular fragrance can carry you back to a moment from years ago with a vividness no photograph could match. And as researchers have discovered, this intimate connection does not close when you fall asleep. In one carefully designed experiment, participants were exposed to the scent of roses during pleasant waking experiences, allowing a gentle association to form between that fragrance and a sense of ease. Later, as they slept, the same scent was quietly introduced into the air around them. When nightmares occurred in the presence of the rose scent, their intensity softened. Fear and tension became less pronounced. The emotional atmosphere of the dream shifted, not dramatically, not by rewriting the dream's content, but by changing its underlying feeling. The way a change in lighting changes the mood of a room without moving any furniture. Most dreamers didn't dream about roses at all. The scent worked more subtly than that, touching not the story of the dream, but its emotional color. This finding opens a door that feels both scientifically exciting and quietly human. It suggests that carefully chosen sensory cues, introduced gently at the right moment, might offer a way to ease recurring nightmares. A subtle push toward comfort from the world outside, reaching in through the darkness. A sound played during sleep can strengthen one chosen memory. The sleeping brain is not resting in any simple sense. Beneath the stillness of a sleeping body, something remarkably active is taking place. The brain is sorting, consolidating, and quietly reinforcing the traces left by the day's experiences. Researchers have found a way to guide that process with elegant precision. Before sleep, participants learn something new, word pairs, or the locations of objects on a screen, with each piece of learning accompanied by a specific, soft sound. A particular piano note becomes linked to a particular set of information. Then, as the participant sleeps, researchers replay just one of those sounds at a gentle, unobtrusive volume. The brain, still responsive even in sleep, hears the cue and quietly reactivates the memory network connected to it. By morning, the information paired with that sound is recalled with noticeably greater accuracy than everything else. This process, called targeted memory reactivation, doesn't create new knowledge. It simply strengthens pathways already laid down, making certain memories easier to retrieve. It reveals something quietly extraordinary. The sleeping brain remains open to gentle guidance. With the right cue at the right moment, we can reach into the night and influence what is carried forward into the morning. A wearable can plan a dream theme and boost creativity. Dream incubation, the practice of guiding the mind toward a chosen theme before sleep, is an idea with a remarkably long history. In ancient Greece, people traveled to sacred temples, performed rituals in specially prepared chambers, and settled into sleep hoping to receive healing visions. What is new is that technology has now given this ancient intuition a considerably more precise form. A lightweight wearable device monitors subtle changes in breathing and muscle tone to detect the exact moment when the body begins drifting into the hypnagogic state, that luminous threshold between waking and sleep where brief, dreamlike flashes begin to appear. At precisely that moment, the device plays a soft, pre-chosen word, ocean or forest, or whatever theme the sleeper has decided to explore. If the sleeper stirs, the device gently asks for a brief spoken description of whatever imagery has appeared, then encourages a quiet drift back into sleep, carrying the thread a little deeper. By morning, people often report fragments of unusually vivid dreams rich with imagery connected to their chosen theme, assembled in surprising and original ways, as if the dreaming mind had been quietly turning the word over all night, finding new shapes within it. Studies have found measurable improvements in creative and flexible thinking following these guided sessions. It is, in its quiet way, a meeting of something very ancient and something very new. An old human intuition about the creative power of sleep, given a gentle technological form. In lucid dreams, people have solved problems and signaled the answers. Lucid dreaming, the experience of realizing you are dreaming without waking up, creates a peculiar and precious double consciousness. You are fully inside the story, immersed in its sensory details, and yet a part of you knows it is a story. That awareness opens an interior space where deliberate thought becomes possible. In sleep laboratories, researchers have assigned tasks to lucid dreamers before sleep. A simple equation, a specific sequence of movements, asking them to complete the task once lucid and signal the result through prearranged eye movements. The results show that deliberate, intentional thinking is genuinely possible within a dream. When dreamers performed imagined physical movements, the brain's motor area is activated in patterns strikingly similar to those produced by real movement. The dreaming mind and the waking mind share more common ground than they might appear to. Outside the lab, lucid dreamers have reported composing music, rehearsing difficult conversations, and arriving at solutions to problems that had seemed impossible while awake. Control is never guaranteed. The dream has its own currents. But the capacity for awareness and intention within the dreaming state makes it, at its best, a genuinely extraordinary space for the mind to inhabit and explore. Acting out dreams can be an early sign of Parkinson's. Every night, without your awareness, your brain quietly disconnects most of your body's voluntary muscles during the most vivid phases of dreaming. You might be running or climbing inside your dream while your body lies perfectly still. This protective arrangement keeps the dream safely contained within the mind. In a condition called REM sleep behavior disorder, this boundary dissolves. The muscles remain responsive, and the body begins to follow the dream. People may shout, swing their arms, or rise from the bed in pursuit of something that exists entirely in their sleeping mind. The experiences can range from unsettling to genuinely dangerous, and care involves creating a safer sleeping environment and, in some cases, medical support. But the deeper significance of this condition lies in what it may signal about the future. Research following people diagnosed with this disorder found that a substantial proportion went on to develop Parkinson's disease or closely related conditions in the years that followed. The connection is not inevitable. Not everyone will follow that path. but it is consistent and significant enough that the disorder is now recognized as one of the most reliable early indicators of neurodegeneration. What appears on the surface to be an unusual pattern of dream activity can sometimes be the first quiet signal of changes happening deep within the brain. Changes that, caught early, leave meaningful time to prepare. AI can sketch rough images from dream brain scans. Dreams leave real, measurable traces in the brain's activity. Recent experiments have begun to decode those traces in a way that once would have seemed entirely fantastical. The research begins while participants are awake, viewing a carefully chosen collection of images while their brain activity is recorded. An artificial intelligence system studies the relationship between what is being seen and the patterns of neural signals that accompany each image, building a detailed map linking brain activity to visual features, shapes, textures, categories like face or building or open landscape. When the same participants sleep, the brain regions that process imagery continue to generate activity. The AI examines those sleeping signals and attempts to reconstruct what they most resemble among everything it has learned. The results are not photographs. They are soft, blurred approximations, impressions rather than depictions. And yet, with a frequency that exceeds chance, they resemble the general category of what the dreaming mind was visiting. A face rather than a landscape, a structure rather than open sky. Other approaches classify themes rather than images, asking whether a dream contains movement or people or animals. The technology is still in its early stages, but it demonstrates something that carries its own quiet wonder. The dreaming mind writes something in the brain's activity, something that can, with the right tools, begin to be read. For the first time, researchers are glimpsing the interior imagery of sleep in real time, opening questions about the future of dream science that are only just beginning to be asked. People born blind dream in sound, touch, and smell. There is a question that seems simple on its surface but opens, upon reflection, into something genuinely beautiful. If you have never seen the world, what do you experience when you dream? People who are blind from birth dream with the same richness, emotional depth, and immersive complexity as those who have spent their lives surrounded by visual information. Their dreams simply unfold through a different vocabulary. Sound becomes the primary architecture of experience. Voices that carry precise emotional meaning, echoes that give rooms their shape and size, the rhythm of footsteps communicating intention before anything else is understood. Touch fills in what sound cannot reach. The texture of a familiar surface, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the particular weight of something lifted. And smell, that most emotionally immediate of the senses, defines entire settings with the sharpness of smoke or the sweetness of something baking nearby. For people who lose their sight later in life, visual imagery often persists in dreams for years, the brain holding on to what it knows, before gradually shifting toward other senses as they grow richer in daily life. All of this points towards something fundamental. Dreaming is not a visual system. It is the brain's capacity to build a complete, emotionally resonant reality from whatever sensory material is most richly available. The act of construction is what matters, not the particular materials any one person's world is made from. Your brain paralyzes you during sleep. Every night, entirely for your protection, your brain quietly switches off most of your voluntary muscles during the phases of sleep most associated with vivid dreaming. You might be running, climbing, or reaching out inside a dream while your body lies perfectly still. The dream and the physical world are kept separate by this seamless, ongoing act of restraint. Most nights, most people never notice this, but sometimes at the shifting edges between sleeping and waking, the timing goes wrong. The mind begins returning toward awareness, but the body, still held in its sleeping stillness, hasn't yet received the signal to release. You find yourself awake, aware of where you are, and completely unable to move. This is sleep paralysis, and in those uncertain moments, the brain often generates vivid hallucinations. The sound of footsteps in an empty room, a pressure on the chest, the powerful impression that someone is nearby. Across cultures and centuries, people have given this experience many names: shadowy figures, old folklore creatures, supernatural visitors, all attempting to explain the same deeply unsettling cluster of sensations. What they were describing, without knowing it, was a brief mismatch in the brain's timing, a temporary gap between a waking mind and a body catching up. It usually resolves in under a minute, leaves no physical harm, and for many people, simply understanding what is happening transforms the experience from something terrifying into something that can at least be recognized and weathered. Dreaming also happens in NREM, not just REM. For a long time, the story of dreaming seemed straightforward. It belonged to REM sleep, that distinctive stage of rapid eye movements and surging brain activity. Everything else, the quieter, slower wave stages that make up the majority of a night, was thought to be essentially dream-free. Then researchers began waking people from non-REM sleep and asking what had been happening in their minds. The answers were surprising. Many people awakened from the lighter N2 stage reported experiences that were recognizably dreamlike, not always as visually intense as classic REM dreams, but thoughtful and emotionally present. Daily concerns being revisited, familiar environments reimagined in small ways, problems approached from unexpected angles. Even in the deepest N3 stage, some people reported moments of surprising clarity. As the night progresses, non-REM dreams in later cycles grow richer and more narrative, taking on qualities more typically associated with REM as the brain's integration of memory and emotion deepens. What this suggests is that dreaming is not a single event belonging to one stage of sleep. It may be a broad, pervasive property of the sleeping brain, one that expresses itself in different forms with different qualities, depending on which networks are active and where in the night's architecture a given moment falls. A posterior hot zone predicts when a dream is happening. For most of sleep science's history, the only way to know whether someone was dreaming at a given moment was to wake them and ask. The dreaming state left no external sign that could be reliably read from the outside. It was, in the most literal sense, invisible. That changed when researchers using high-density brain recordings began noticing a consistent pattern in the back of the brain, in the regions responsible for processing visual information, spatial awareness, and the sense of the body moving through an environment. When this area, now called the posterior hot zone, shows high-frequency electrical activity during sleep, people woken at that moment report, with striking consistency, that they were in the middle of a dream. When it goes quiet, even during REM sleep, people report nothing at all. This finding helps explain why dreaming occurs across sleep stages. It is less about which stage the brain is in, and more about whether this particular region is active. Different areas within the zone even correspond to different dream content. Regions involved in face perception activate when dreams contain faces. Spatial regions become active when dreams involve movement through an environment. It is one of the clearest biological markers of the dreaming state yet identified, offering scientists a genuine window into when the sleeping brain is constructing its private, immersive world. Emotional centers stay active while logic quiets down. When you dream, the brain doesn't go quiet. It shifts its balance. The regions most associated with emotion, particularly the amygdala and the hippocampus, remain highly active, driving the dream's emotional weather, its sense of urgency and significance. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, which in waking life acts as the brain's logical editor and fact-checker, grows comparatively quiet. The result is precisely what dreamers experience. Events that would immediately be questioned while awake pass without scrutiny. The emotional systems keep the dream's sense of reality fully inflated, while the voice that would ordinarily notice an impossibility and flag it for attention has stepped aside. Contradictions flow unchallenged. Scene changes happen without transition. Impossible events feel perfectly natural. In lucid dreams, parts of the prefrontal network re-engage, restoring the capacity for self-reflection, which is exactly what allows a lucid dreamer to recognize the dream for what it is. Yet even then, the emotional intensity rarely diminishes. The world still feels real. Scientists suggest this particular balance, emotion high, logic low, may serve a genuine purpose, allowing the brain to move through emotional territories it needs to process, freely and without the inner critic's interference, doing in the dark what waking life's constraints would make difficult. PGO waves ripple as vivid imagery builds. Deep within the sleeping brain, in the hours of most vivid dreaming, something rhythmic is quietly unfolding. Brief, sharp bursts of electrical activity arise in the brain stem and travel upward along a specific pathway, from the pons to a relay station called the lateral geniculate nucleus, and finally into the occipital cortex at the back of the brain, the region most directly responsible for processing visual information. These traveling waves are known as PGO waves, named for the 3 points along their journey. In animal studies, they appear with particular frequency during REM sleep and tend to coincide with rapid eye movements, as though each burst accompanies the eyes tracking something seen. Many researchers believe they play an active role in generating the imagery of dreams, acting as internal signals that initiate new scenes, mark transitions, or shift the dream's attention. They also occur near regions associated with memory and emotion, suggesting they may be involved in memory consolidation as well as image generation. In humans, PGO waves have proven harder to measure directly, but EEG recordings and studies using clinical electrodes suggest similar events are present. We cannot yet watch a dream unfold frame by frame from the outside, but PGO waves hint at an internal rhythm, a pulse of creative activity rising and falling through the night, shaping the vivid, shifting scenery of the dreaming mind. Acetylcholine rises as norepinephrine and serotonin dip. Each stage of sleep carries its own chemical atmosphere, and during REM sleep that atmosphere becomes something genuinely distinctive. Acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that supports cortical arousal and helps generate rich, immersive imagery, rises sharply. The brain, chemically speaking, is being driven toward vivid, active experience. At the same time, norepinephrine and serotonin, which in waking life support alertness, careful attention, and the logical, reality-grounded quality of ordinary thinking, fall to some of their lowest levels of the entire day. The systems that would normally keep the mind tethered to rational evaluation withdraw almost entirely. The result is exactly what dreamers describe: intense internal experience, strange associations flowing without resistance, emotional content arriving with full force but without the modulating influence that waking chemistry provides. Dopamine shows a more varied pattern, fluctuating in ways that may contribute to the particular sense of urgency and significance that dreams carry. The feeling that whatever is happening matters deeply, even when the waking mind would find it absurd. These chemical shifts are not random. They appear to support the specific work of dreaming sleep, processing emotional memories, enabling flexible thinking, allowing the brain to form connections that the tightly regulated chemistry of waking life would make far more difficult. They also help explain why certain medications, antidepressants, nicotine patches, can so noticeably change the intensity and character of our dreams. The brain's inner critic relaxes, letting stories bend physics. In waking life, a part of the brain is always quietly working in the background, monitoring the logic of your thinking, checking whether what you believe aligns with what you know, flagging inconsistencies, enforcing the rules of cause and effect. During sleep, this inner critic sets down its work and rests. The prefrontal cortex, most associated with rational evaluation and logical consistency, reduces its activity significantly during dreaming. In its absence, the stories the dreaming mind constructs are free to follow their own internal logic, which has very little to do with the logic of the waking world. You can find yourself in a room that is simultaneously your childhood home and a place you have never been, and feel no contradiction. A person can be two people at once. The laws of physics become, in dreams, merely suggestions. When lucid dreaming occurs, parts of this rational network return, restoring the ability to assess and sometimes redirect the dream. Scientists have suggested that the temporary quieting of the critic may serve a real purpose. A mind freed from the strict enforcement of existing rules is a mind that can explore combinations and connections the waking mind would too quickly dismiss. Dreams may bend physics not for its own sake, but to give the mind a regular, protected space in which it is permitted to think beyond what it already knows. Day residue shows up in dreams with a quirky delay. Pay close attention to your dreams on any given morning, and you will likely recognize, somewhere within them, the fingerprints of the previous day. A conversation, a face, a place you passed through briefly. These recent experiences surface in the night's dreaming, transformed and woven into new contexts but recognizable at their core. This tendency is called day residue, and it has been noted in dream accounts for as long as people have been writing them down. But researchers studying this pattern discovered something that didn't quite fit the simple picture. Memories don't only return on the night they were formed. They show a second peak of appearance roughly a week later, a pattern known as the dream lag effect, found in both emotional experiences and in tasks involving new learning. The most convincing explanation involves a two-stage process of memory consolidation. In the first days after an experience, the brain works to stabilize and encode the memory firmly. Then, about a week later, it revisits that now stable memory with a different purpose, weaving it into the broader fabric of existing knowledge, finding its connections to everything else. When these memories return in dreams during the lag period, they rarely arrive as simple replays. They come back fragmented and recombined. A sound from one moment, a feeling from another, assembled into entirely new scenes. Not a recording of what happened, but the dreaming mind's own reinterpretation. A quiet, creative act of making sense of a life, carried out in the dark, every night, without us ever needing to ask. This dual timing suggests dreaming is tied to memory consolidation. We have already explored how the events of a day tend to surface in the dreams of the night that follows. Those familiar echoes of recent experience that researchers call day residue. But as we noted earlier in our journey, the story of memory and dreaming does not end there. The brain returns. It comes back, roughly a week later, to revisit what it has already begun to process, weaving freshly stabilized memories into the broader, deeper networks of everything the mind already holds. This two-stage rhythm suggests that dreaming is not a single event in the life of a memory, but a recurring one. The brain encounters an experience, begins to anchor it during the first night, and then, days later, returns to find where it belongs in the larger landscape of a life. What fades between these two visits is not lost carelessly. The mind appears to make an ongoing, quiet judgment, deciding what deserves to be carried forward, what can be allowed to soften and dissolve, and what needs to be woven more tightly into the self. Both the immediate residue and the delayed echo serve this same patient process, sorting, strengthening, and letting go. Dreaming, in this light, is less a single event and more a continuing conversation between the present moment and the accumulated past. Threat simulations often play out safely in dreams. If you were to keep a careful record of your dreams over several weeks, and then compare that record to a diary of your actual waking days, you would likely notice something striking. The dreaming world is a considerably more dangerous place than the life you are actually living. Threats that rarely materialize in waking experience, being chased through unfamiliar streets, finding yourself cornered with no exit, facing danger without the ability to run. appear in dreams with a regularity that far exceeds anything the daily diary would justify. Psychologists who have studied this pattern believe it reflects something purposeful rather than arbitrary. The brain, it appears, uses the safe container of sleep to rehearse responses to danger. In the dreaming state, a threat can be faced without real consequences. The fear is genuine, the urgency is real, but the outcome carries no lasting harm. The dream provides a kind of training ground where the emotional and physiological systems that respond to danger can be exercised and refined without the cost of actual risk. What makes this theory particularly compelling is the way threatening dreams tend to resolve. They rarely end in true catastrophe. More often, the dreamer escapes, finds an unexpected exit, or wakes at the critical moment, as though the simulation has served its purpose and the brain releases its grip before the scenario crosses into genuine distress. Children, whose smallness in a large world creates a particular kind of ongoing vulnerability, report proportionally more threatening dreams than adults. People who have lived through genuine danger carry those experiences into their sleep, the dreaming mind working to process and rehearse responses to situations that have already proven real. The dream is not merely reliving the fear, it is practicing the way through it. Not every nightmare serves this constructive purpose. In conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder, dreams can become trapped in repetitive loops that replay distress without resolution, stuck in a pattern that reinforces fear rather than easing it. But in the broader landscape of ordinary dreaming, the prevalence of threat and the frequency of escape together suggest that what the dreaming mind does with danger is, in most cases, genuinely useful. Social worlds get rehearsed at night like practice runs. Step into almost any dream and, before long, you will find yourself in the company of others. Dreams are extraordinarily social environments. The figures that populate them, familiar faces transformed by the dream's particular logic, colleagues appearing in contexts that have nothing to do with work, family members showing up in places they have never been, crowd the dreaming landscape with a density that consistently surprises researchers when they measure it against the actual social content of waking days. This observation has given rise to what researchers call the social simulation hypothesis. The idea that one of dreaming's quieter, but most important functions is to provide a rehearsal space for the endlessly complex work of being a person among other people. Inside the protected space of sleep, we negotiate and argue, we reach out and pull back, we misread signals and recover from misunderstandings, we offer comfort and receive it, all without any real relationship hanging in the balance. The stakes of the dream's social world feel real. The emotions are genuine, the interactions carry weight, but the morning always arrives, and whatever went wrong in the dream has left no lasting damage to the people we actually love. The brain regions most involved in understanding others' inner lives, in modeling what another person might be thinking or feeling, in reading the emotional signals that pass between people in conversation, remain unusually active during dreaming sleep, even as the logical, evaluative systems that govern more deliberate thinking grow quiet. This particular combination may be precisely what makes dream rehearsal effective. The social mind runs warm and responsive, free from the self-consciousness that can make real social situations feel constrained. Different outcomes can be tested. Conversations that went wrong can be run again with different choices. Tensions that have built up across a week of real interactions can be allowed to play out in the dream's more generous space. Dreams remix fragments of life into entirely new scenes. Try sometime to trace the elements of a vivid dream back to their origins, and you will likely find yourself following threads into very different corners of your life. A room that is somehow simultaneously familiar and impossible. A person who carries the face of one friend and the manner of another. A feeling that belongs unmistakably to one memory, wrapped around imagery that could only have come from somewhere else entirely. Dreams are not recordings of experience. They are something more interesting than that. Collages assembled from fragments drawn from different times and places, layered together by the sleeping brain into arrangements that have never existed before. Neuroscience research points to the hippocampus as the engine of this process. During sleep, it reactivates fragments of experience, not complete memories, but pieces, elements, the emotional residue of an event without its full context. And the cortex receives these fragments and stitches them into something new. The result is a dream scene that might combine a cafe from last Tuesday with an anxiety from childhood and a snatch of conversation from this morning, assembled into a narrative that follows none of those experiences, but carries the emotional truth of all of them. This creative recombination may serve purposes that go beyond simple memory consolidation. By testing new arrangements of existing experience, the brain may be extracting principles, finding the general rule that lives beneath the specific event, building a kind of flexible wisdom from the accumulated material of a lived life. And the creative potential of this process extends further still. The combinations that would never occur to the waking, rule-following mind arise naturally in the dreaming state, which is why so many of history's most original ideas have emerged from sleep. People who dream about a task they have been learning tend to perform it better the following day, as though the dream's remixing has found a better shape for the knowledge, one that the waking mind's more cautious approach could not reach. Hypnagogic flashes bloom right as you fall asleep. There is a threshold at the very edge of sleep that most people pass through without noticing. A brief, fragile zone where waking and dreaming overlap, where the mind has not yet committed to either state and exists, for a few precious minutes, in a condition of unusual openness. This is the hypnagogic state, and what happens within it is among the most quietly extraordinary experiences the brain can produce. As the body relaxes and the brain's electrical rhythms begin their slow shift towards sleep, images arise without being summoned. Geometric patterns bloom and dissolve. Fragments of faces assemble themselves briefly and then scatter. Landscapes appear from nowhere with a vividness that has no waking source. These hypnagogic images are not dreams in the full sense. They lack the narrative continuity and emotional depth of proper dreaming, but they reveal something important about the speed with which the dreaming mind begins its work. Even before sleep is fully established, the brain is already reaching for imagery, already beginning the process of constructing an interior world from the sensory fragments available to it. Some people experience the hypnic jerk during this transition, a sudden, involuntary physical startle that arrives with the sensation of falling, pulling the body briefly back toward alertness before sleep resumes its claim. Others hear voices or brief snatches of sound that have no external source, their origin in the brain's beginning attempt at dream construction. The state is exceptionally suggestible. A word held gently in the mind as sleep approaches, a feeling carried from the day, an intention set before the eyes close. Any of these can seed the hypnagogic imagery in ways that feel almost magical. Artists, scientists, and inventors across history have recognized this quality and deliberately cultivated it, learning to hover at the edge of sleep long enough to catch the ideas that surface there, then waking to record what the threshold between worlds has offered. Hypnopompic echoes linger as you wake up. If the slide into sleep has its luminous, flickering border, the return from it has its own equally curious quality. Waking is not always a clean transition. The dreaming mind, having spent hours constructing its private world with considerable intensity and detail, does not always release that world instantly when morning begins to reassemble itself around the sleeper. In the hypnopompic state, the period of transition out of sleep, fragments of the dream can linger in a way that overlaps, strangely and sometimes beautifully, with the returning reality of the waking world. A voice that was speaking in the dream may continue at the edge of hearing for a moment after the eyes open. A face that appeared in the final dream may seem to hover at the periphery of vision, before dissolving as the room comes into focus. Sometimes the dream imagery and the real environment exist simultaneously, the bedroom walls visible through a scene that still has not quite finished dissolving, two worlds briefly occupying the same perceptual space. These experiences are most common after the vivid, extended REM sleep of the early morning hours, when the brain's scene-building regions have been running at their most active and the return of logical oversight is still incomplete. For most people, they are fleeting and harmless, carrying a quality that is more interesting than alarming, a reminder of how fully the dreaming mind had committed to its construction and how gradually it concedes the floor to waking. For those with narcolepsy, these experiences can be more frequent and more vivid, occasionally merging with sleep paralysis to create something considerably more disorienting. But even in its gentlest forms, the hypnopompic state offers a glimpse of what we so rarely get to see: the dreaming world in the act of dissolving, the boundary between imagination and reality at its most permeable. Time inside dreams can stretch or compress strangely. Among the many ways that the dreaming world departs from the rules of ordinary experience, its relationship with time is one of the most consistently puzzling. A dream that feels, from the inside, like an entire afternoon of richly detailed experience may have occupied only a few minutes of actual sleep. And yet another dream, brief and impressionistic in its subjective quality, may have lasted considerably longer than it seemed. The clock and the dream do not always agree, and the disagreement can run in either direction. The most precise measurements of dream time have come from lucid dreamers willing to serve as their own timekeepers. Asked to count silently to 10 within the dream, and to signal both the start and the end of the count through prearranged eye movements, most dreamers count at a pace very close to their waking rate. The basic mechanism of time perception, it appears, remains broadly intact within the dream. What creates the sense of temporal expansion or compression is something different: the way the dreaming narrative handles transitions. Real time is full of ordinary moments, the in-between spaces of experience that carry no particular significance. Dreams tend to edit these out. They move directly from meaningful moment to meaningful moment, compressing the structure of an experience into its emotional highlights, which creates the impression of a story that covers far more ground than the clock would suggest. Emotional intensity adds another layer to this distortion. Moments of great feeling, fear, joy, grief, the particular charged quality of a significant encounter, expand in memory and in subjective experience, seeming to last longer than they measurably do. This is as true in dreams as it is in waking life. But in dreams, where emotional intensity runs higher and the editorial controls that govern ordinary experience are loosened, the effect is amplified. Dream time is elastic, sometimes racing forward through scenes and settings, sometimes lingering in a single moment until it feels endless, always following the logic of feeling rather than the logic of clocks. External sounds weave themselves into the plotline. Even in the depths of sleep, the ears do not entirely close. Most of the sound reaching the sleeping brain is filtered quietly away, assessed, categorized, and deemed insufficient to justify the interruption of rest. But certain sounds slip through, and when they do, they are not simply registered and ignored. They are absorbed. They are given a role in whatever story the dreaming mind is already constructing, folded into the narrative with a seamlessness that reveals how committed the dreaming brain is to the coherence of its own creation. A door closing somewhere in the house arrives in the dream as a crack of thunder. The rhythm of a dog barking outside finds its way into the story as an animal encountered at the edge of the dream's landscape. A song from a radio in another room becomes the background music of a scene the dreamer is already inhabiting, its melody shaping the mood of what is unfolding as naturally as if the dreamer had chosen it. The sound has not woken the sleeper. It has been recruited. Researchers have turned this tendency to productive use. playing carefully chosen tones during sleep to reactivate specific memories formed earlier in the day, using the brain's own openness to sound as a lever for guiding memory consolidation. But beyond this practical application, the phenomenon reveals something fundamental. Dreaming is not a sealed interior experience, cut off from the world that continues beyond the closed eyes. It is a construction that holds itself open to the outside, absorbing what arrives into whatever story it is currently telling, always finding a way to explain what it receives rather than simply ignoring it. Light flashes can appear as lightning or camera flashes. The eyelids offer protection, but not complete insulation. A bright flash in a sleeping room, a passing car's headlights sweeping through a curtain, a sudden light in a hallway. These brief pulses of brightness can reach the retina through closed eyelids and trigger a response in the visual system that the dreaming brain must account for. And account for it, characteristically, it does. Rather than registering the light as an interruption, rather than allowing it to break the narrative coherence of the ongoing dream, the brain finds a place for it within the story. The flash becomes a bolt of lightning splitting a dark sky. It becomes the pop of a camera at a moment in the dream when a photograph is being taken. It becomes the flare of oncoming headlights on a night road. The dream has not been disturbed. It has been expanded, given a new element that it promptly incorporates as though it had always been planned. Researchers who tested this directly, shining gentle, carefully calibrated pulses of light onto sleeping volunteers, and then asking about their dream content upon waking, found that many reported scenes in which brightness appeared, woven into the narrative with apparent naturalness. Stronger or poorly timed light tended to wake the sleeper entirely, but subtle flashes were absorbed with remarkable consistency. This finding has practical applications in sleep research, offering a non-invasive way to introduce signals during specific sleep stages. But it also tells us something more fundamental about the dreaming brain's character. It is a storyteller that refuses to leave anything unexplained, always finding a way to weave even the uninvited into the ongoing tale. Your own name still cuts through from the outside. Of all the sounds that might reach a sleeping person across the night, one has a particular and documented ability to register more deeply than the rest: the sound of their own name. Studies measuring brain activity during sleep have found that hearing one's own name produces a stronger and more distinct neural response than hearing equally familiar words. Even when the sleeper shows no outward sign of waking, even when they have no conscious memory of having heard anything at all. The name can trigger what researchers call a K-complex during lighter stages of non-REM sleep, a brief, sharp wave of activity that the brain generates in response to signals of particular significance. During dreaming sleep, it may be incorporated directly into the dream's narrative, arriving as the voice of someone calling from another room, as a summons that draws the dreamer's attention within the story, its real origin only understood upon waking. The reason for this special sensitivity appears to be evolutionary. Through most of human history, the ability to respond to a personal call, a warning shouted in the dark, the voice of someone approaching, without fully abandoning the restorative depths of sleep, would have carried genuine survival value. The brain has held on to this sensitivity, maintaining a dedicated thread of attention for the most personally relevant signal, even while the rest of the auditory world is filtered away. Sleep, in this sense, is never quite complete disconnection. Some part of the mind always remains on watch, and it knows its own name. Pain shows up less often and often feels muted. For all the emotional intensity that dreams can carry, the sharp fear of a nightmare, the grief of a loss experienced in the dreaming world, the physical urgency of being pursued, actual physical pain makes surprisingly few appearances in the dreaming mind's productions. When it does arrive, it tends to do so in a form that differs meaningfully from its waking counterpart. Softer at the edges, briefer in duration, or transformed into something more symbolic and less sharp. People who live with chronic pain or who are recovering from injury sometimes carry traces of that pain into their dreams. But even in these cases, the dream experience tends to shift and soften what the waking body knows as relentless and precise. The brain stem, during sleep, actively dampens the sensory pathways through which pain ordinarily travels toward conscious experience. The neurochemical environment of sleep reduces the signals that amplify pain's intensity in waking life. And the dreaming brain's attention, so fully engaged with imagery, narrative, and emotional processing, simply has less capacity to maintain the kind of sustained bodily monitoring that makes pain a persistent waking experience. The practical and clinical dimension of this is worth noting. Physical pain in dreams stands out against the usual background of dream experience precisely because it is so uncommon. When a patient reports genuine, persistent pain in their sleep, it can serve as a signal that something deserves closer attention, a physiological communication that has managed to cross the brain's usual nighttime filters because it is significant enough to insist on being heard. Tastes and smells appear rarely, but still shape emotion. Ask someone to describe a vivid dream, and they will almost certainly describe what they saw. They may describe what they heard. They might mention a feeling of movement or touch. But rarely, only occasionally, and usually briefly, will they describe what they tasted or smelled. These two senses, so richly present in waking life and so intimately connected to memory and emotion, make surprisingly few explicit appearances in the dreaming world. When they do arrive, they tend to do so simply, a sweetness without a specific source, the ghost of smoke, a flavor that dissolves before it can be named. And yet, despite their rarity as objects of conscious dream attention, smell and taste are not without influence in the dreaming hours. Smell in particular, connecting as it does through the most direct neural pathway to the brain's emotional and memory centers, can reach into the dream and shape its atmosphere without ever declaring its presence. A pleasant scent introduced into the air of the sleeping room can soften the emotional tone of whatever dream is unfolding, gentling a threatening scenario, lending warmth to a neutral one. An unpleasant odor can darken the dream's mood in ways the dreamer will feel but not be able to explain. The scent is not perceived as a scent within the dream. It simply changes how the dream feels. For people whose waking lives are organized around these senses, chefs whose relationship to flavor is a form of professional fluency, perfumers who navigate the world through a richly differentiated olfactory landscape, dreams sometimes carry a sensory texture that most people's dreaming minds do not produce. The pathways are more practiced, the representations more detailed, and the dreaming brain has more material to work with. For the rest of us, taste and smell in dreams are like the instruments in a film score that you don't consciously notice, but that you would miss immediately if they were gone. Most dreams are in color, despite old black and white reports. It seems like it should be a simple question. Do you dream in color? And yet the history of how people have answered it turns out to reveal something genuinely interesting about the relationship between culture and inner experience. For several decades through the middle of the 20th century, research studies regularly found significant proportions of participants reporting that their dreams were in black and white, or that color was absent or negligible. This puzzled researchers who could see no neurological reason why the visual brain, fully capable of generating rich color in waking experience, would choose to abandon it in sleep. The explanation that eventually emerged was elegant in its simplicity. The cultural media that had dominated people's visual experience through childhood, black and white cinema, black and white television, had left a deeper imprint on the internal visual imagination than anyone had expected. People who had grown up watching the world's stories told in shades of gray were more likely to dream in those same shades, not because their visual systems lacked the capacity for color, but because so much of the imagery they had absorbed from the wider world had come without it. As color media became the universal norm, reported rates of colorful dreaming climbed correspondingly. Today, the overwhelming majority of people describe their dreams as colored, though the palette is not always the saturated brightness of a summer afternoon. Dream colors are sometimes muted, sometimes concentrated in a single striking detail, a vivid coat in a gray landscape, a green sign in an otherwise indistinct street. Many dreamers, when asked, report that they had not consciously noticed the color while dreaming, suggesting that it is simply present, assumed, as automatic as the color of the waking world. Dreams, it turns out, are not only biological events. They are cultural ones too, shaped by the visual world that has been internalized across a lifetime. Eye movements sometimes mirror where dreamers look. The rapid, flickering eye movements that define REM sleep have fascinated researchers since they were first documented and systematically studied in the 1950s. Their precise function has been debated across the decades, but experiments with lucid dreamers have offered one of the most illuminating windows yet into what those movements might actually reflect during the dreaming experience itself. Before settling into sleep, lucid dreamers and research studies agree on a simple set of signals. When directing their gaze toward a specific object or direction within the dream, looking left, looking right, tracking something moving across the dream's visual field, they will move their eyes in the corresponding direction as a deliberate, communicative act. When the recorded eye movement data is then compared to the dreamer's later reports of what they were looking at in the dream at those moments, the correspondences are striking. The eyes, beneath their closed lids, appear to be following the dream's gaze. Some of these movements are generated by the brain stem independently of dream content, an internal rhythm that has nothing to do with what is being seen. But enough of them correspond to the reported direction of attention within the dream that researchers now use specific eye movement patterns as rough timestamps, allowing them to link measurable external signals to particular moments in the internal narrative. The dreaming eye, invisible to the outside world in the darkness behind closed lids, is still, in its quiet way, looking at something. The motor cortex activates for actions your body doesn't make. The body is still. The muscles are held in sleep's protective grip, disconnected from the commands that the waking motor system would normally translate into movement. And yet, inside the skull, in the regions of the brain that plan and execute physical action, something very much like movement is happening. Brain imaging studies of sleeping subjects have shown that dreaming about specific physical activities, running, climbing, swimming, playing a musical instrument, performing the precise sequence of movements in a practiced skill, activates the same motor circuits that would be engaged if those actions were actually being performed. The neural rehearsal is genuine, even as the body remains motionless. The pathways that support the skill are being traced, used, reinforced, without a single muscle fiber contracting in response. This finding has generated real fascination about what dreaming might contribute to physical learning and performance. Musicians who dream of playing their instrument. Athletes whose training appears in the dreaming hours as the brain runs through the movements they practiced earlier in the day. People learning new physical skills who find those patterns recurring in their sleep. When they wake, some perform measurably better than they did the previous day, as though the night's silent rehearsal has done real work, strengthening the neural substrate of the skill without the body needing to be present for the practice. The body sleeps. The training continues. Tiny twitches leak through the paralysis as fragments of motion. The paralysis of sleep is thorough but not absolute. The inhibitory system that holds the body still during dreaming, a network of circuits in the brain stem and spinal cord sending continuous signals that suppress the motor neurons, has occasional small failures, and when it does, the dreams leave brief, involuntary traces on the body that the dreaming mind cannot entirely contain. A finger curls, a foot kicks gently outward. The lips form the shape of words that are being spoken in the dream. The eyes shift and flutter beneath their closed lids, following a tension that exists only in an interior world. These small movements, for a long time dismissed as random muscle activity, have been shown by more careful research to correspond meaningfully to the content of the dream that is unfolding. A dream of kicking a ball produces a faint kick from the dreaming leg. A dream of speaking produces subtle movements at the mouth. A dream of reaching for something may produce the ghost of a reach. In animals, where the motor systems are wired somewhat differently and the inhibitory block less complete, these leakages are even more visible. A sleeping cat may crouch and spring. A dog's legs may paddle in the rhythm of a dream pursuit. Scientists who have observed these movements, and who have, in some cases, disabled the atonia-producing circuits experimentally to see the full dream acted out, believe that what is visible in the twitches is a genuine fragment of motor command, a real signal generated by the dreaming brain that has slipped past the system designed to hold it in. Like sparks escaping briefly from a contained fire, they are the inner world briefly and silently becoming visible. Nightmare frequency rises with stress, then often falls when stress eases. Nightmares are not distributed randomly across the nights of a life. They gather around difficulty. When waking life is under pressure, the sustained tension of an important deadline, the grief of a loss, the unresolved weight of a conflict that cannot yet find its resolution, the dreaming hours tend to grow darker in response. The themes of nightmares during these periods often echo the pressures being carried, though in the exaggerated, symbolic form that the dreaming mind favors. The threat that in real life is abstract and ongoing becomes, in the dream, immediate and physical. The leading interpretation of this pattern is that the dreaming mind is doing something purposeful with the emotional material it has been given. By staging threatening scenarios repeatedly, by running through feared outcomes with the full intensity of emotional experience, the brain may be working to process the load, gradually reducing the charge of feelings that would otherwise remain unresolved and acute. The nightmare is not a symptom of something going wrong. It is, in most cases, evidence of something being worked on. As the underlying stress resolves, as the deadline passes, the grief finds its shape, the conflict moves towards some kind of peace. The nightmares tend to diminish as well, their frequency declining with a naturalness that mirrors the easing of the waking burden. Childhood, with its particular vulnerability and its many necessary adjustments to the world, is a time of relatively frequent nightmares. So are the major transitions and losses of adult life. In both cases, the dreams are accompanying the person through difficulty, doing the slow work of emotional processing that the waking hours cannot always complete. Nightmares can be treated without medication in many cases. The knowledge that nightmares are treatable, that their patterns, however deeply established, remain open to change, is one of the most genuinely encouraging things that sleep science has to offer. For people whose nights have been defined by recurring fear, who have organized their lives around the dread of closing their eyes, this understanding opens a door that had seemed, for a long time, firmly shut. The treatments that have proven most effective work not by suppressing the dreaming mind's activity, but by engaging with it directly, by using the brain's own mechanisms to introduce new material into the dreaming repertoire. Imagery rehearsal, the most widely studied of these approaches, asks the dreamer to meet the nightmare while fully awake and deliberately change its story, to write a new ending, to transform the threatening element, to give the dream a different path to follow. This revised version is then rehearsed repeatedly in the imagination during waking hours, planted carefully into the memory, given the repetition it needs to take root. Other approaches work at the level of the body's readiness for fear. Calming routines before sleep, mindfulness practices that reduce the emotional charge nightmares feed on, the slow building of a different relationship between the sleeper and the night. Dream journals that turn frightening experiences into narratives that can be read steadily in daylight. transforming something that felt overwhelming into something that can be held at the distance of language. In some cases, particularly where trauma is involved, medication offers additional support. But the underlying message, that the dreaming mind is responsive, adaptable, and capable of learning, holds across all of these approaches. Imagery rehearsal therapy lets you rewrite a nightmare's ending. Among all the tools available for working with troubled dreams, imagery rehearsal therapy has perhaps the most elegant logic. It asks nothing of the dreamer during sleep itself. All its work happens in the ordinary light of waking hours, and yet its effects travel reliably into the dreaming night, changing what the sleeping mind produces with a consistency that researchers have now documented across many studies and many populations. The process begins with writing. The nightmare is set down in as much detail as memory allows. The setting, the sequence of events, the quality of the threat, the feeling that runs through it from beginning to end. Then comes the act of revision. While fully awake, the dreamer creates a new version. Not necessarily a comfortable or tidy one, but a different one. A story in which the ending changes, in which the dreamer has agency, in which the feared outcome dissolves or transforms into something the dreaming mind can pass through rather than be trapped by. This new version is rehearsed daily in the imagination. Given the repetition it needs to establish itself as a genuine alternative narrative. What makes this work is grounded in how the dreaming brain generates its material. It draws heavily on images, narratives, and emotional associations stored in memory. And when a revised version of a story is placed carefully in that memory and returned to repeatedly, the dreaming mind finds it available as an alternative path. Over time, the original nightmare weakens, follows the new script, or simply ceases to return. Sleep becomes less a source of dread and more what it was always meant to be, a place of rest. Recurrent dreams often resolve when their waking trigger changes. There are dreams that return across months and years with a persistence that feels almost insistent. The same examination room, the same unprepared feeling, the same dark street and the same footsteps behind. The same fall from a height that never quite reaches the ground. These repeating dreams carry a quality of incompleteness, as though they are waiting for something to change before they are willing to stop. Research into long-term dream diaries has revealed a pattern that is simple once you see it, and quietly profound once you understand what it means. The recurring dream tends to fade when the waking life concern at its center shifts. The student whose dreams are defined by examination failure may find those dreams disappearing naturally after graduation. The person who has spent years dreaming of being lost may find the theme vanish once they have resolved the uncertainty that was feeding it. The recurrence in this reading is not a malfunction, not the dreaming mind stuck in a pointless loop, but a form of faithful attention, a persistent returning to something unresolved that the waking life has not yet fully addressed. This view offers a kind of reframing of what recurring dreams are for. They are not torments without purpose. They are the dreaming mind's way of keeping a particular worry or conflict present and available for processing, returning to it with a reliability that the more distracted waking mind might not sustain, until the situation it reflects has moved enough for the dream to finally let it go. Sleep paralysis blends waking awareness with dream paralysis. Sleep paralysis arrives in the gap between states, in the disorienting moments when consciousness has reassembled itself enough to feel awake, but the body has not yet received the signal that allows it to move. Normally, the lifting of paralysis and the return of waking awareness happen in close enough sequence that the gap is never noticed. But when the timing separates, when the mind wakes before the body catches up, the result is one of the most universally and historically documented strange experiences that sleep can produce. You are awake. The room is visible or feels visible. You know where you are, and you cannot move. You cannot speak. The weight of your own stillness is absolute, and around it the dreaming brain, still partly active, continues to generate. Not imagery exactly, but something more atmospheric and more threatening. The sense of a presence in the room, a pressure on the chest, a sound approaching from the wrong direction. None of it is there. All of it is felt. Across cultures and across centuries, human beings have given this experience many names, always locating the cause in something external. A demon, a spirit, a weight that sits upon sleepers and holds them down. The old hag, the night visitor. These stories are the attempts of minds encountering a neurological event to explain it through the only frameworks available to them. Today we understand what is happening. A mismatch in the timing of sleep transitions, brief and harmless, resolved within a minute, leaving no physical trace. For those who experience it regularly, this understanding can be genuinely transformative, not erasing the fear of the moment, but placing it in a context that makes it bearable. Exploding head syndrome blasts imaginary booms at sleep onset. The name is dramatic, and the experience is startling, but exploding head syndrome is entirely harmless, a fact that provides real comfort to the many people who encounter it without any prior warning that such a thing exists. At the moment of drifting into sleep, or occasionally during the transition out of it, a tremendous noise seems to detonate without warning. A gunshot, a crash, an explosion so immediate and so loud that the heart races and full wakefulness snaps back in an instant. Nothing in the room has changed. No sound has occurred. The entire event was generated within the brain itself, and the most widely accepted explanation involves a brief disruption in how the brain shuts down its sensory systems at sleep onset. Ordinarily, the transition into sleep involves a smooth, sequential quieting of neural activity, one system after another settling toward rest. In exploding head syndrome, this sequence briefly misfires and multiple sensory networks discharge simultaneously, producing a burst of perceived sound that has no external cause and lasts only the fraction of a second required for the brain to catch itself and correct. Some people encounter this experience only once in their lives. Others find it recurring with some regularity, particularly during periods of fatigue or disrupted sleep. In every case, the most helpful response is simply knowledge. The sleeping brain has a repertoire of unusual events that it can produce. This is one of them, and it says nothing about the health of the brain that generates it. False awakenings can stack into dream-within-dream loops. There is a particular kind of dream experience that challenges, in a uniquely direct way, our confidence in the reliability of waking itself. The false awakening begins exactly as real waking does. The familiar sensation of consciousness returning, the room assembling itself in proper detail around the sleeper, the body feeling present and ready to begin the day. A person rises, moves to the bathroom, begins the unremarkable rituals of morning, and then something small doesn't fit, some detail that should be right isn't quite, and the recognition arrives with a quality of vertigo, still asleep. The dream had simulated not a fantastic landscape or an impossible situation, but the ordinary, textured reality of the sleeper's own morning, in such faithful detail that there was nothing obvious to flag it as dream. This is one of the most striking demonstrations of what the dreaming brain can do. Not just construct imaginary worlds, but replicate with apparent precision the specific, unremarkable surfaces of the real one. When false awakenings stack, one apparent waking followed by another, each feeling equally real until some small impossible detail gives it away, the experience can become genuinely disorienting, a sequence of exits from rooms that turn out to be rooms within rooms. For lucid dreamers who have learned to treat the moment of waking itself as suspect, a false awakening can become an opportunity, a chance to recognize the dream and step into it consciously. For others, it leaves a lingering uncertainty in the early morning, a heightened awareness of how thin the membrane between the dreamed and the real can sometimes be. Teeth falling and flying are common across many cultures. Gather dream reports from people living in different countries, different centuries, different cultural contexts, and two themes will surface again and again with a consistency that seems to transcend all of those differences. One is the dream of flying, of rising from the ground, of moving through air with a freedom and lightness that the waking body can never quite achieve, looking down on the world from an altitude that changes everything about how it looks. The other is the dream of losing teeth, that strange, vivid, deeply unsettling experience of feeling teeth loosen, crumble, or fall away, leaving an absence that carries an emotional weight out of all proportion to the physical event. Flying dreams tend to arrive with a particular quality of feeling, a sense of liberation, of having escaped the usual constraints, of being able to go anywhere and being afraid of nothing. Some researchers connect this to the unusual vestibular experiences that the body can generate during sleep, when the normal proprioceptive anchoring of the self to the ground is loosened and the brain constructs sensations of movement and weightlessness from its own internal signals. Others suggest that flying dreams draw on something deeper, a recurring wish for the kind of freedom and perspective that waking life's obligations rarely allow. The teeth dream carries a different emotional register entirely. It is almost universally reported as disturbing, carrying with it an ambient anxiety that the dreamer often struggles to articulate. Theories connect it to fears about appearance and how one is perceived, to anxieties about aging and physical change, to the broader human unease about losing control over the body's integrity. What is striking is not which interpretation is correct, multiple may be, but the sheer cross-cultural universality of the experience. Across centuries and continents, the dreaming mind returns to these two images, as though they are written into the shared vocabulary of human sleep. These themes show up in dream reports across cultures and eras. We closed our last section with two of the most universally recurring images in the entire human record of dreaming: the dream of flight and the dream of losing teeth. And what makes these images so worth dwelling on is not simply that they are common, but that they are common everywhere, across languages, across centuries, across cultures that share almost nothing else in their symbolic vocabularies. Flying dreams arrive with a quality of feeling that most dreamers recognize immediately upon waking: a lightness, a liberation, a sense of moving through the world without the usual resistance. The body that is so subject to gravity, so anchored to the ground and to obligation, discovers in the dream that it can rise. Some researchers point to the unusual vestibular sensations the body can generate during sleep: the floating feeling, the sense of weightlessness that arrives when the usual proprioceptive anchoring of the self loosens, as a physiological source for this imagery. Others suggest something deeper is at work, that the flying dream draws on a wish so fundamental and so widely shared that it transcends any particular cultural expression. The wish to be free, the wish to see clearly from above, the wish, perhaps, to escape just briefly from the weight of being a person with a body and a history and a set of obligations that press from all sides. The teeth dream comes from a different register of human concern entirely. It arrives with a quality of wrongness, of something essential being lost, of the body becoming unreliable in a way that carries emotional weight out of all proportion to the physical event. Theories about its meaning circle a cluster of related anxieties: concerns about appearance and how one is perceived by others, fears about aging and the body's gradual departure from its own vitality, the broader unease that accompanies any loss of control over something that felt stable. These are not culturally specific anxieties. They belong to the universal experience of being human, of having a body that changes, a face that others read, a self that depends on the world's regard. The dreaming mind reaches for these images because they carry truths that need no translation. The dream world has its own shared language, and these two images are among its most ancient and most widely spoken words. Dream recall varies hugely between people and can be trained. Walk into any gathering of people and ask how many remember their dreams, and the range of responses will be striking. Some will tell you they wake every morning with the residue of detailed, vivid stories still present in memory. Whole narratives with specific settings and emotional arcs that they could describe at length. Others will tell you they almost never remember a dream, that their nights are essentially blank, that they cannot remember the last time they woke with any sense of having been somewhere. Both groups are almost certainly dreaming. The difference between them lies not primarily in the amount of dreaming that occurs. The architecture of REM sleep is roughly similar across healthy adults, but in the conditions under which the transition back to waking takes place, and in the activity of specific brain regions during that critical moment. People who wake more frequently across the night tend to catch dreams in progress, interrupting them before the memory can dissolve. Those who move through their sleep relatively undisturbed may sleep through every dream without a moment of interruption at which to capture it. Brain imaging studies have added another dimension to this picture, finding that people who regularly recall their dreams show stronger activity in a region called the temporoparietal junction, an area associated with the processing of external stimuli and with the kind of attention to internal experience that memory retrieval requires. What makes this particularly meaningful is the finding that recall is not fixed. It responds to practice. The commitment to keeping a notebook within reach, the habit of pausing before moving upon waking, the simple intention set the night before to pay attention to what was dreamed. All of these shift the conditions under which dream memory is either preserved or lost. Over time, even someone who has spent years believing they simply don't dream can find that the window begins to open, and the world that was always there behind it starts to come through. Keeping a dream diary boosts recall within days. Of all the practices associated with improving the relationship between a person and their dream life, keeping a written record is the simplest and consistently among the most effective. Sleep researchers who have studied the practice find that its effects tend to appear quickly, sometimes within just the first few nights of beginning, and that they compound in ways that go well beyond simple record keeping. The act of writing down a dream, even in the most fragmentary and imperfect form available in the first moments of waking, does something specific and measurable to the brain's handling of that memory. It creates a second encoding, a waking trace that reinforces and stabilizes what would otherwise dissolve within minutes. The brain, receiving the signal that this content is worth preserving, begins to hold on to dream material a little more carefully. Even a single image, a color, a feeling, a half-remembered face, written down before the morning fully takes hold, can become a thread that the mind uses to pull more material into the light on subsequent occasions. Over weeks of consistent practice, the entries tend to grow longer and more detailed, not necessarily because more dreaming is occurring, but because the habit of attention changes what gets captured. And something else begins to emerge as the diary accumulates: patterns. Recurring figures who appear across otherwise unrelated dreams, settings that return with variations, emotional themes that run as an undercurrent through weeks of dreaming, surfacing in different forms but unmistakably the same in feeling. The dream diary does not merely preserve individual memories. It gradually builds a portrait of the inner life that the forward momentum of waking consciousness, with its constant emphasis on what is next rather than what was, might never pause long enough to notice. Nighttime awakenings catch more dreams than morning recall. Most people relate to their dream life through what survives to morning, the final fragments of the final dream, caught in the brief window between the last sleep cycle and the alarm. This approach, while the most natural and least disruptive, captures only a narrow slice of what has actually been happening across the night. The dreaming mind has been active for hours before that final waking. Stories have unfolded, Emotions have been processed, memories have been revisited and reorganized, and the vast majority of it has dissolved before morning makes any of it available. Research makes this gap visible in a striking way. People woken gently at several points throughout the night report far more dreams, and far more varied ones, than those who wake only at the end of the night. The dreams encountered in these earlier awakenings are often different in character from the vivid, elaborate productions of the final REM period. Shorter, less visually intense, sometimes remarkably realistic and mundane, reflecting the quieter emotional processing of the night's earlier stages. By morning, these dreams have been overwritten by later cycles, their content absorbed back into the undifferentiated rest of the night. For those whose curiosity about their own dreaming runs deeper than convenience allows, a carefully timed middle-of-the-night awakening, brief enough not to seriously disrupt sleep, followed immediately by a few written notes, can reveal a richness and variety in the night's interior life that would otherwise remain entirely hidden. It highlights something important, that the dreaming mind is not doing a single thing across the night, but many things, moving through different kinds of work in different stages, most of which the morning will never know about unless it is deliberately sought. Morning REM is especially rich in vivid dreams. Sleep does not hold itself steady across the night. It moves through a repeating architecture of cycles, each lasting roughly 90 minutes, each containing its own particular balance of lighter and deeper stages. And the balance of that architecture shifts significantly as the hours accumulate, with consequences for the quality and character of the dreaming it produces. In the first sleep cycles of the night, the deep, slow-wave stages dominate. The body achieves its most profound physical rest. REM sleep visits, but briefly, a matter of minutes before the cycle descends again toward the restorative depths that the body is most urgently seeking in the early hours. But as the night progresses and the need for slow-wave sleep is gradually satisfied, the proportions shift. Deep sleep shortens. REM expands. By the final cycles before waking, individual REM periods can extend to 40 minutes or more, with the brain generating its most elaborate, most emotionally charged, most visually vivid productions of the entire night. This is the architecture that explains so much about how people experience their dreams. The last dream before waking is so often the most memorable, not only because it is the most recent, but because it was genuinely the most fully developed, the longest, the most narratively complex, the one the brain was in the midst of constructing when morning interrupted. The dreaming mind builds toward these final episodes with the patient rhythm of a storyteller who has been setting up all night for the most immersive chapter. The morning dream is not simply what remained closest to waking. It is what the night had been working toward all along. REM rebound after deprivation brings intense, frequent dreams. The brain keeps a kind of quiet account of what it is owed. When REM sleep is suppressed or shortened, whether by alcohol, by exhaustion, by medications that affect its chemistry, or simply by the accumulated shortfall of too many nights cut short, the brain does not accept the deficit passively. It remembers, and when the opportunity for full, uninterrupted sleep returns, it claims what it has been missing with a speed and thoroughness that can be surprising to experience. This compensatory response is called REM rebound, and its effects are unmistakable. A person who has spent several nights without adequate REM sleep will typically enter it more quickly than usual once they rest fully, will spend proportionally more time there, and will cycle through it more frequently. The dreams that emerge from these rebound nights are often described in terms that suggest something more than ordinary dreaming. More emotionally intense, more visually elaborate, more persistent in their hold on the sleeping mind, and sometimes difficult to separate from wakefulness in the moments immediately after. Multiple vivid dreams across a single night. Unusual or overwhelming narrative complexity. A quality of urgency that ordinary dreaming rarely carries. What REM rebound demonstrates, perhaps more clearly than anything else in sleep science, is that this stage is not a luxury. The brain treats it as an essential, tracks any shortfall with apparent precision, and compensates with a determination that reveals how seriously it takes whatever work happens there. The wild, vivid dreams of a long sleep after a period of exhaustion are not coincidental. They are the brain insisting, with the particular forcefulness of something long delayed, on what it has been waiting to do. Antidepressants can change dream vividness and frequency. Many antidepressant medications work, at least in part, by altering the balance of serotonin and norepinephrine in the brain, the same two neurotransmitters that play central roles in shaping the chemistry of REM sleep and in determining the conditions under which vivid dreaming occurs. It follows, then, that these medications frequently change the character of the dreaming hours in ways that users notice, and that researchers have documented across a wide range of drug types and individual responses. The most commonly reported effect is a reduction in REM sleep, which manifests in waking experience as a diminishment of dream recall. Fewer dreams remembered, less vivid imagery, nights that feel quieter and more uniform. For some people, particularly those whose sleep has been dominated by distressing or intrusive dream content, this reduction is genuinely welcome. The stilling of the dreaming hours feels like relief rather than loss. For others, the change carries a different quality, a sense that something has been muted, that the interior richness of the night has been dimmed along with the distress that prompted the treatment in the first place. In some cases, the effects run in the opposite direction. Certain medications produce dreams that feel unusually intense, emotionally loaded, or strange in ways that can be disorienting, as though the chemical shift has altered not the quantity of dreaming, but its character, pushing it into territories that feel less like the dreaming mind's usual work and more like an unfamiliar guest. The variety of responses reflects both the genuine differences between medication types and the remarkable individual variation in how each brain responds to changes in its chemical environment. What the findings share across all of this variation is a consistent message. The dreaming mind is not separate from the brain's chemistry. Change the chemistry, and the dreams change with it. Nicotine patches can make dreams unusually vivid. Among the more unexpected findings to emerge from clinical trials of nicotine replacement therapy, one stands out for the frequency and vividness with which people describe it. The dreams, for many users, become extraordinary, unusually bright in their visual detail, strange in the combinations they produce, memorable in a way that dreams rarely are, persisting into the waking hours with a clarity that ordinary dreaming seldom achieves. People who had not given their dream life much thought before beginning the patches find themselves waking with complete, elaborate narratives still present in memory, wondering what has happened to their nights. The explanation reaches into the same chemistry that we have been tracing throughout this exploration. Nicotine stimulates a class of receptors that also play a significant role in regulating the brain's activity during sleep. Receptors that interact with the acetylcholine system, the same neurotransmitter that rises sharply during REM and helps generate the vivid, immersive imagery that characterizes the dreaming stage at its most active. When nicotine is delivered continuously through the skin across the night, it provides ongoing stimulation to these receptors during precisely the hours when the dreaming brain is most engaged with visual construction, intensifying what is already happening and producing a richness and strangeness that exceeds the usual. For some users, this side effect is a welcome discovery, a serendipitous opening of the dreaming mind to a quality of experience that feels creative and memorable. For others, the intensity becomes exhausting, the night ceasing to feel restful under the pressure of dreams that are too vivid to simply pass through. Most find that the effect diminishes as the brain adapts to the continuous chemical presence, or fades naturally once the patches are no longer needed. It is, in its way, Another reminder of how exquisitely responsive the dreaming mind is to even small perturbations in the brain's chemical balance. Alcohol suppresses early REM, then rebounds with heavy dreams. Alcohol enjoys a cultural reputation as a sleep aid that its actual effects on the sleeping brain do not entirely support. It reliably shortens the time it takes to fall asleep, quieting the mental activity that can keep people awake in the restless hours before rest arrives. And this initial effect is real enough that many people reach for it deliberately as a way of easing the transition to sleep. But what follows across the rest of the night is considerably more complicated than the simple deepening of rest that this reputation implies. In the first hours of sleep, alcohol suppresses REM, holding back the dreaming stage, delaying its appearance, reducing the time spent in the state that serves so many of the brain's most important overnight functions. The sleep that follows drinking may feel deep, and in some respects it is. Slow-wave sleep in the early night is not severely disrupted by moderate alcohol consumption. But the architecture is incomplete, the dreaming hours held at bay by the sedating chemistry that has eased the initial descent. Then, as the alcohol metabolizes and its suppressive effects wear off in the later hours of the night, the brain reasserts its need. REM returns, not gently and gradually, as it would in an undisturbed night, but with the compensatory force of rebound, arriving in longer and more intense bursts that have the quality of a debt being collected. The dreams of these late-night rebound hours tend toward the vivid, the restless, and the disturbing. The sleeper may wake frequently in the early morning, remembering fragments with an unusual clarity born precisely from waking during the middle of active dreaming. What began as an easy descent into sleep has become, by the small hours of the morning, a negotiation between the sedating chemistry and the brain's insistent need to do its dreaming work. Cannabis can mute REM, stopping can unleash vivid dreaming. Regular cannabis use is associated with a consistent and well-documented suppression of REM sleep. For many frequent users, this effect is most immediately noticeable as an absence of remembered dreams, nights that pass in a smooth, undifferentiated stillness, without the vivid narratives, emotional intensities, and strange imagery that normally populate the dreaming hours. Some users report going weeks or even months without recalling a single dream, a change so gradual in its onset that it may not be noticed until something draws deliberate attention to it. A question from a doctor, a conversation about sleep, a moment of wondering why the nights feel so different from how they used to feel. The mechanism involves cannabis's interaction with the endocannabinoid system, which plays a regulatory role in the cycling between sleep stages. Regular stimulation of this system appears to reduce the time spent in REM, flattening the night's architecture in ways that preserve the continuity of sleep, but at the cost of its most vivid and emotionally active productions. When cannabis use stops, the brain's response can be swift and striking. REM sleep rebounds with an intensity that surprises many people, years of suppressed dreaming asserting itself in compressed and concentrated form. The first nights of abstinence often bring dreams of unusual elaborateness and emotional charge, sometimes bizarre in their content, sometimes overwhelming in their persistence, as though the dreaming mind has been waiting with considerable patience and is now making up for lost time. For most people, this rebound phase settles over the course of weeks as natural sleep architecture reestablishes itself. For others, the return of dreams after a long absence is a significant and sometimes moving experience, a re-encounter with an inner life that had grown very quiet. Beta blockers are notorious for strange dreams and nightmares. Beta blockers are prescribed primarily for cardiovascular purposes, managing blood pressure, stabilizing an irregular heartbeat, easing the physical toll of chronic anxiety on the heart. Their mechanism of action involves blocking the effects of adrenaline and related compounds, quieting the body's stress response systems in ways that benefit the heart and circulation. Most patients who begin taking them are focused entirely on these intended effects and are unprepared for the way their dreams sometimes change in response. The reports are consistent enough to be well documented. Unusually vivid dreams, imagery that feels strange or unsettling in ways that have no obvious waking cause, nightmares with an emotional charge that seems disproportionate to the life being lived. The quality of strangeness that these dreams carry is distinctive, not the ordinary vividness of a productive dreaming night, but something more disquieting, as though the emotional register of the dreaming mind has been shifted into a range it does not normally inhabit. The most likely explanation involves the drug's effects on norepinephrine activity in the sleeping brain, disrupting the usual patterns of arousal regulation and memory processing in ways that alter how the dreaming state is constructed. Some beta blockers cross the blood-brain barrier more readily than others, and those that do tend to produce these effects more reliably. Adjusting the timing of the dose, or switching to a formulation with less central nervous system penetration, can often reduce the nocturnal disruption while preserving the cardiovascular benefit. The phenomenon reminds us, again, that the brain that dreams and the body that takes medication are not separate systems. What reaches the heart can reach the sleeping mind as well. Pregnancy often brings more vivid, emotionally rich dreams. During pregnancy, the dreaming hours frequently become more intense in ways that many people find both striking and meaningful. Colors in dreams deepen. Narratives grow more elaborate. Emotions arrive with a directness and force that can linger well into the morning, shaping the mood of the waking hours that follow. Many pregnant people describe their dreams during this period as the most vivid they have ever experienced, rich with imagery of water, of animals, of thresholds and transformations, threaded through with feelings that circle the great approaching change. The physiological explanation involves the hormonal landscape of pregnancy, in which elevated levels of progesterone and estrogen reshape many aspects of physical and emotional experience, including sleep architecture. Time spent in REM tends to increase. The body's need for rest intensifies, but the quality of that rest is altered by the physical changes that pregnancy brings. The discomforts, the frequent awakenings, the restlessness that makes the later months, in particular, a more fragmented kind of sleep than the body is accustomed to. Each of these awakenings, while disruptive to continuous rest, also creates a natural opportunity to catch dreams in the act, before the usual dissolution of memory can occur. What the dreaming mind does with all of this material is worth attending to. The imagery of pregnancy dreams often has a quality of symbolic preparation, the mind working through its anticipation, its anxiety, its wonder, its not yet fully formed understanding of what is about to change. Dreams of water may reflect the body's awareness of the life growing within it. Dreams of animals may draw on instinctive associations with nurturing and protection. Whatever the particular content, the dreaming mind during pregnancy appears to be doing something that mirrors what the waking mind is doing, preparing, in its own oblique and deeply personal language, for the arrival of something entirely new. Fever can make dreams bizarre and intensely visual. When the body runs a fever, the dreaming mind tends to produce material of an unusual and often deeply memorable character. People who have experienced illness accompanied by significant temperature elevation frequently recall, sometimes years later, the distinctive quality of the dreams that accompanied it. More distorted than ordinary dreaming, more visually intense, carrying a quality of surrealism that ordinary dreaming rarely matches, and that daylight does not entirely dispel. Colors shift and bleed into one another. Proportions lose their reliability. Landscapes breathe and pulse. Objects expand and contract according to logic that has nothing to do with physics. The emotional atmosphere of fever dreams tends toward the oppressive, a quality of being trapped or overwhelmed that is more insistent than the fear of ordinary nightmares, as though the boundaries that ordinarily contain the dreaming experience have become permeable, allowing the body's physiological distress to seep directly into the imagery. The neurological basis for this involves the brain's sensitivity to temperature. Elevated body heat disrupts the normal architecture of sleep, altering the transitions between stages and affecting the way that sensory information is processed during dreaming. The visual cortex, already highly active during REM, may become more responsive under thermal stress, generating imagery with an intensity that the more regulated dreaming brain does not normally produce. The prefrontal systems that provide even dreaming with its minimum of coherence are further weakened, allowing associations to form with fewer constraints than usual. The result is a dream world that feels both more real and more impossible than ordinary dreaming, vivid beyond comfort and strange beyond explanation. Sleep apnea fragments REM and alters dream recall. Sleep apnea is a condition in which breathing repeatedly and involuntarily pauses across the night, each pause triggering a brief awakening, sometimes dozens or hundreds of times, in a pattern so consistent that many sufferers have no conscious awareness of it occurring. The sleeper does not remember waking. They do not feel the interruptions as interruptions. And yet, by morning, the consequences of this fragmented night are present in the body as fatigue, in the mind as reduced alertness, and in the dreaming life as a landscape that has been quietly depleted. REM sleep is particularly vulnerable to this kind of fragmentation. The extended, continuous periods of dreaming that the brain requires to produce its most vivid and emotionally significant work depend on an uninterrupted architecture that the repeated micro-awakenings of sleep apnea consistently deny. For many people with untreated apnea, the result is a dream life that feels thin and indistinct. Fewer remembered dreams, less narrative complexity, a quality of gray uniformity across the night where the dreaming mind's usual richness would otherwise be found. There is a paradox here that sleep researchers find interesting. In some cases, the very frequency of the awakenings actually increases dream recall. The sleeper surfaces directly from a dream and catches it before the usual dissolution can occur. But even when this happens, the dream content tends to be more anxious and more distressing than usual, reflecting the body's ongoing struggle for air, a physiological urgency that the dreaming mind has absorbed and translated into its own symbolic language of threat and constriction. Treating apnea with CPAP can change dream patterns markedly. For those who begin CPAP therapy, the continuous positive airway pressure device that maintains an open airway through the night, preventing the pauses in breathing that fragment sleep. The changes in the dreaming life often arrive with a speed and vividness that surprises people who had not realized how much their dreaming had been affected. With the breathing stabilized, REM sleep is allowed to complete itself. The cycles that were repeatedly interrupted can now extend to their natural length. The architecture of the night, previously fragmented into dozens of incomplete segments, settles into the deeper continuity that the dreaming brain requires for its most meaningful work. And the brain, catching up on the dreaming time it has been missing, sometimes for years, responds with a surge of vividness that can feel overwhelming in the first nights of treatment. This initial intensity is a form of REM rebound, the brain reclaiming its interrupted dreaming with the particular urgency of something long delayed. For some patients, it is a welcome sign that the therapy is working, a vivid and personal confirmation that the night is becoming what it was supposed to be. For others, the sudden flood of unusually intense dreams can be unsettling, leaving them wondering whether the treatment is agreeing with them. In most cases, the intensity moderates over the following weeks as the brain settles into its new and healthier rhythm. Dreams becoming less chaotic, sleep feeling more restorative, and the night gradually becoming, once again, a place of genuine repair. Narcolepsy brings vivid dream intrusions at sleep onset. In narcolepsy, the carefully maintained boundary between waking and dreaming becomes unreliable. where most people descend through a gradual sequence of lighter and deeper sleep stages before arriving at the vivid dreaming of REM. Those with narcolepsy can move almost directly from wakefulness into the dreaming state, bypassing the usual architecture entirely, arriving in REM before the body has had time to complete its transition, before the ordinary separation between the inner world and the outer one has been fully established. The consequence is that the vivid imagery and emotional intensity of dreaming can arrive while the person is still partly present in the waking world, overlapping with real perception, blending with the actual environment, creating experiences that feel indistinguishable from reality because they are, in a sense, taking place within it. A face appearing in an empty room. A voice speaking from a source that doesn't exist. A scene assembling itself around the edges of real vision. These intrusions can be frightening, particularly for those who have not yet received a diagnosis that explains them. For researchers, narcolepsy offers a uniquely revealing window. The disorder exposes, with unusual clarity, the mechanisms that normally keep dreaming contained to the sleeping hours, making visible, through their failure, the systems that most of us never need to notice because they work so consistently and so seamlessly. The flexibility of the boundary between sleep and waking, normally experienced only in the brief margins of hypnagogia and hypnopompia, becomes in narcolepsy a daily and sometimes hourly negotiation. Cataplexy shows how emotion can trigger sleep-like paralysis. Cataplexy is among the most striking of all sleep-related phenomena, not because it occurs during sleep, but precisely because it does not. It is a sudden, brief loss of voluntary muscle control that arrives in the middle of waking life, triggered not by fatigue or by the approach of sleep, but by emotion. Laughter, particularly, the bright, involuntary laughter of genuine amusement, is one of the most reliable triggers. So is excitement or surprise, or the particular physical feeling of strong positive emotion arriving without warning. When an episode occurs, muscles lose their tone. Knees may buckle, the face may go slack. In more severe episodes, the person may collapse entirely, though consciousness typically remains intact throughout. The person is aware, present, experiencing the moment fully, and yet the body has, for a few seconds, entered a state that closely resembles the muscle paralysis of REM sleep. The mechanism appears to involve the same brain stem circuits that normally initiate autonia during dreaming, activated prematurely, triggered not by the approach of sleep, but by the neural signals associated with strong emotional experience. In a sense, the emotional intensity of laughter or excitement is doing what the brain chemistry of REM normally does, activating the paralysis circuits before the body has had any intention of sleeping. For researchers, cataplexy illuminates the deep connection between emotion and the sleep system, a relationship so fundamental that even in waking life, under the right emotional conditions, the sleeping machinery can be briefly summoned. REM sleep behavior disorder plays dreams out in real life. In ordinary sleep, the body and the dream remain separate. However vivid the dreaming becomes, however physically urgent the scenarios it constructs, the motor system is disconnected from the dream's commands by the inhibitory circuitry that keeps the body still. You may dream of running, of fighting, of reaching desperately for something, and your body lies motionless, the dream safely contained within the mind. In REM sleep behavior disorder, this separation fails. The inhibitory system does not engage fully, and the body follows the dream. People with this condition move through their dreaming hours in ways that make the interior world suddenly, and sometimes dangerously present in the physical one. Speaking, shouting, leaping from the bed, striking out at threats that exist only in the sleeping mind. The dreams that accompany these behaviors tend to be vivid and action-filled. Chases, confrontations, physically intense scenarios that the body responds to as though they were real, because the mechanism that would normally prevent that response has not been engaged. The immediate consequences are practical and sometimes serious. Partners and family members witness behaviors that can be alarming and occasionally dangerous, and the sleeping environment may need to be carefully adapted to prevent injury. But beyond these immediate concerns, REM sleep behavior disorder carries a deeper clinical significance that has emerged from long-term studies. It is one of the most reliable early indicators of certain neurodegenerative conditions, a signal written in the body's behavior years before other symptoms of those conditions appear. RBD is a strong early marker for synuclein diseases. The connection between REM sleep behavior disorder and neurodegeneration is one of the most clinically significant findings to emerge from sleep research in recent decades. Long-term studies following people diagnosed with RBD have consistently found that a substantial proportion, in some studies, the majority over sufficiently long follow-up periods, go on to develop Parkinson's disease, multiple system atrophy, or dementia with Lewy bodies. These are conditions that share, beneath their different clinical presentations, a common pathological feature: the accumulation of abnormal aggregates of a protein called alpha-synuclein in the brain's deep structures. The motor circuits most affected by RBD, the brain stem networks that normally enforce the autonomia of dreaming sleep, overlap significantly with the regions that show the earliest signs of alpha-synuclein pathology in these conditions. This overlap is not coincidental. The failure of dream paralysis, in many cases, appears to be an early expression of the same underlying process that will eventually affect other brain systems, producing the more recognizable symptoms of tremor, movement difficulty, and cognitive change that define these diseases in their later stages. This timeline makes early identification genuinely valuable. A diagnosis that might otherwise be treated as a sleep management challenge becomes, in this context, an opportunity for closer and more systematic monitoring of brain health, for lifestyle adjustments that research suggests may slow neurodegeneration, for participation in clinical trials testing interventions at a stage when prevention is still possible. The dreaming body, in this sense, is speaking early, and learning to hear what it is saying can make a meaningful difference to what comes next. PTSD can pack sleep with recurring, emotionally loaded dreams. For most people, the dreaming mind performs a kind of ongoing emotional housekeeping, taking the difficult experiences of waking life, revisiting them in the shelter of sleep, and gradually reducing their emotional charge until they can be carried with more ease. A hard day becomes a manageable memory. A painful encounter loses some of its sharpness. The dreaming hours do their quiet work, and the waking hours are a little lighter for it. For people living with post-traumatic stress disorder, this process breaks down. The dreaming mind returns, night after night, to the same territory, sometimes replaying the original traumatic experience with a sensory fidelity that strips away all the distance that waking consciousness has tried to establish, sometimes translating it into symbolic forms that carry the same fear without the same literal content. Either way, the dream does not move the emotional weight. It reinstates it, afresh, with each repetition. Research has located part of the explanation in the amygdala, which in PTSD is chronically overactivated, responding to the emotional material of dreams with an intensity that prevents the modulation and integration that healthy dreaming normally performs. The chemical environment of REM sleep, which in ordinary circumstances supports a gradual softening of emotional memories, is disrupted in ways that allow the fear to persist at full intensity rather than fading with repetition. What the dreaming mind offers most people as a place of processing becomes, for those with PTSD, a place of reliving. And understanding this distinction has become central to how clinicians approach both the sleep symptoms and the broader suffering of the condition. Nightmare therapies can reduce distress and improve sleep. The recognition that nightmares are treatable, that even the most entrenched and distressing dream patterns can be changed, represents one of the genuinely hopeful findings in the science of sleep. For people who have spent long periods organizing their lives around the dread of what happens when they close their eyes, this knowledge is not a small thing. It means that the night, which has become a source of renewed suffering, can become something else. The treatments that have proven most effective work not by suppressing the dreaming mind's activity, but by engaging with it directly, using the brain's own flexibility and responsiveness to introduce new material into the dreaming repertoire. Imagery rehearsal therapy remains the most extensively studied, and its results across many populations and many kinds of nightmare have been consistently encouraging. Other approaches work through the body's readiness for sleep, relaxation training that reduces the physiological arousal that nightmares feed on, mindfulness practices that change the relationship between the dreamer and the fear that their dreams produce, carefully calibrated sensory cues during sleep that can gently shift the emotional atmosphere of whatever dream is unfolding. For trauma-related nightmares, where the dreaming mind is replaying material of unusual intensity and persistence, some medications provide additional support when behavioral approaches alone are insufficient. But the underlying principle that holds across all of these methods is the same, and it is worth stating clearly. The dreaming brain is not rigid. Its patterns, however deeply established, remain open to change. With the right kind of attention and the right kind of guidance, even the most troubled dreamscape can learn, over time, to become a quieter and more restorative place. Children dream differently. The dreams of early childhood inhabit a world of their own, simpler in structure than adult dreaming, shaped by the particular contours of a mind that is still assembling its understanding of what reality is and how it works. Young children's dreams tend to be populated with animals, with simple and often physically immediate adventures, with the large emotional concerns of a small person navigating a large world. The storylines are fragmented rather than continuous, more like a sequence of vivid snapshots than a flowing narrative, reflecting the developmental stage of the brain systems that support the kind of sustained, perspective-rich storytelling that adult dreaming produces. As the brain matures, as the cortical networks responsible for visual processing, narrative construction, and the modeling of other people's inner states develop their full range, the dreams that emerge from sleep grow correspondingly richer and more complex. The social world enters in a more nuanced way. Characters develop individual qualities. The emotional register widens to include the more subtle feelings that come with growing awareness of oneself in relation to others. The dream begins gradually to have a shape, a beginning that leads somewhere, a middle with its own logic, something resembling a resolution. What is perhaps most revealing about childhood dreams is not their simplicity, but their themes. Being chased, being lost, being separated from the people who provide safety. These are not random selections from the full range of possible human experience. They are the central concerns of early childhood, the existential vulnerabilities of a being who is still entirely dependent, still learning what the world can do, still finding out where safety lies and what it means when it is not available. The dreaming mind of a child is already doing the same work that adult dreaming does, accompanying the self through its most pressing concerns, rehearsing responses to its most significant fears, and working, in its own particular language, toward whatever degree of understanding is currently available. Adolescents report more intense and social dream themes. As childhood gives way to adolescence, the dreamscape shifts in ways that mirror, with remarkable fidelity, the particular preoccupations and pressures of those transforming years. The relatively simple adventures of early childhood give way to something considerably more emotionally complex. Dreams crowded with peers, saturated with the concerns of social standing and identity, charged with the intensity of relationships that feel, in those years, more significant and more fragile than they will perhaps ever seem again. Teenage dreams tend toward the dramatic in ways that are not merely stylistic. Conflict appears more frequently and feels more urgent. Embarrassment and social exposure. The particular, acute vulnerability of being seen and found wanting surface with a vividness that reflects the heightened self-consciousness of adolescent identity formation. Romantic feeling arrives in dreams with the same intensity it carries in waking life, unmodulated by the experience that will eventually provide some perspective. The stakes feel high because, in the developing emotional world of adolescence, they are. The neurological basis for this shift is well established. During adolescence, the brain regions responsible for social reasoning, self-awareness, and the modeling of others' perspectives are undergoing rapid and significant development. Their circuits being refined, their connections with emotional processing areas being strengthened, their sensitivity to social information being calibrated in ways that will shape social behavior for the rest of the person's life. The dreaming mind, as it does throughout the lifespan, faithfully mirrors the work that the waking brain is engaged in. The intensity, the social richness, the particular emotional frequency of adolescent dreams are not exaggerations of adolescent experience. They are its accurate reflection. Teenagers often dream of school, friends, and relationships. We spoke in our last section about the way adolescent dreams shift in character from the simpler adventures of childhood, growing more social, more emotionally charged, more preoccupied with the particular concerns of a self that is actively in the process of becoming. That shift deserves a little more attention, because what happens in the dreaming mind during adolescence reveals something important about what the brain is actually doing during those turbulent years. The dream reports of teenagers, when collected and analyzed systematically, show a consistent pattern. More conversations, more conflict, more interactions with peers, more scenarios involving embarrassment, exclusion, or the high-stakes social negotiations that define so much of adolescent waking life. The storylines are less likely to involve the physical threats and simple chases of childhood dreaming, and more likely to involve the complex, emotionally layered situations of social belonging and identity. Who am I to the people around me? How am I seen? What happens when things go wrong in the relationships that matter most? These are the questions that the adolescent waking mind returns to constantly, and they are the questions that the dreaming mind rehearses across the night. Brain development provides the underlying explanation. The networks responsible for self-awareness, identity formation, and the modeling of other people's inner states are, during adolescence, undergoing some of their most significant and rapid reorganization. The social brain is being wired for the complexity that adult life will require of it, and the dreaming hours appear to participate actively in that wiring, providing a space where social scenarios can be run through, emotional responses can be tested, and the particular intensity of adolescent feeling can be experienced without permanent consequence. For many teenagers, the dreams of these years carry an emotional reality that rivals waking experience. Not because dreaming is more intense in adolescence than at other times, but because the waking life itself is more intense, and the dreaming mind faithfully reflects it. Older adults recall fewer dreams, but not necessarily fewer REM cycles. One of the most commonly held beliefs about dreaming and aging is that dreams become less frequent as the years accumulate, that the vivid, emotionally charged productions of youth gradually give way to quieter and less eventful nights. Many older adults report exactly this experience, describing their dreaming as sparse compared to what they remember from earlier in life. And yet the research tells a more nuanced story, one that challenges the simple equation between aging and diminished dreaming. The amount of REM sleep, the stage most closely associated with the most vivid dreaming, does not decline dramatically through the adult years in healthy individuals. The architecture of sleep shifts in various ways as the body ages, with deep slow-wave sleep in particular becoming shallower and less sustained. but REM itself remains a significant presence through the night well into later life. What changes is not primarily the amount of dreaming that occurs, but the conditions under which it can be remembered. Older adults tend to wake less frequently in the middle of REM sleep, which means they have fewer natural opportunities to catch dream memories in the brief window before they dissolve. The memory systems that support the transfer of dream content into accessible recall also shift with age in ways that make it harder to hold on to the fleeting, unstable impressions of the dreaming state. The dream may have been equally vivid, equally present, equally complete, but by the time full waking consciousness reassembles itself, it has already gone. When older adults are woken directly from REM sleep in laboratory settings, many report dreams with real detail and genuine narrative coherence. The content tends to differ from younger dreamers' reports. Fewer physically intense pursuits, fewer emotionally turbulent social conflicts, more everyday situations with a quality that is quieter and more reflective. These shifts mirror, with the same faithfulness that dreams always show, the evolving emotional landscape of a life that has moved through its most urgent passages and arrived at something that carries different priorities. Dreaming does not abandon us with age. It simply adapts, accompanying us into each new chapter with the same patient attention it has always brought. Chronotype shifts dream timing and themes across the night. Every person carries within their biology a natural preference for when to sleep and when to wake, a deep, genetically influenced tendency that researchers call chronotype, and that most people experience simply as being a morning person or an evening person. This tendency is not merely a matter of habit or preference. It is wired into the circadian system, the body's internal clock, and it shapes the architecture of sleep in ways that extend further than most people realize, reaching into the timing, the character, and even the thematic content of the dreams that sleep produces. For those whose biology inclines toward earlier rising, sleep pressure builds quickly in the evening, and the descent into deep, slow-wave sleep happens sooner in the night. Their most vivid REM periods may therefore occur earlier than those of people whose natural rhythm runs later, a shift that means their most memorable dreams arrive at a different point in the sleep cycle, and that the content of those dreams may reflect a brain that is at a different stage of the night's emotional processing work. Evening types, whose natural schedule pushes their extended REM toward the early morning hours, tend to experience their richest dreaming closest to waking, and studies suggest that the content of these late-night dreams carries its own particular character, more socially complex, more adventurous, more emotionally layered. Morning types, whose dreaming is more evenly distributed across the night, more often recall scenes that are calmer and more routine in their texture. These are not dramatic differences, but they are consistent ones, a reminder that the dreaming mind does not operate in isolation from the body's other systems. The internal clock that tells you when to feel alert also shapes, in quiet and specific ways, the stories your sleeping mind tells. Most REM clusters late in the night, toward morning. Sleep moves through its cycles with a rhythm that shifts as the night progresses, and understanding that shift illuminates one of the most consistent features of how people experience their dream lives. Each sleep cycle runs roughly 90 minutes from beginning to end, moving through lighter and deeper stages in a sequence that repeats across the night. But the proportions within each cycle change significantly depending on where in the night that cycle falls. In the first cycles of the night, the body's need for deep slow-wave sleep is most urgent, and the cycles are weighted accordingly. Extended periods of the deepest, most physically restorative sleep, with REM visiting briefly before the cycle descends again. By the second half of the night, as the accumulated debt of slow-wave sleep is gradually satisfied, the balance shifts. The deep stages shorten. REM expands. Each successive cycle allocates more time to the dreaming stage, until the final cycles of the early morning hours are dominated almost entirely by REM. periods of 40 minutes or more during which the brain generates its most elaborate, most vivid, most emotionally and narratively complex dreaming of the entire night. This is why the last dream before waking is so often the most memorable, the most fully realized, the one that carries the clearest sense of a complete and immersive experience. It was not merely the most recent, it was genuinely the most developed, the one the sleeping brain had been given the most time and the most favorable conditions to construct. The night builds toward these final productions with the patient accumulation of a long story reaching its most fully inhabited chapter. To cut sleep short, to wake before the body is ready, is to miss precisely the dreaming the brain had been preparing for all along. Lucid dreams are more likely in late-night REM. Lucid dreaming, the remarkable experience of becoming aware, within the dream, that you are dreaming, does not distribute itself evenly across the night. It clusters in the final hours, during the long and vivid REM periods that the night's architecture builds toward, when the brain's activity most closely resembles the patterns of waking consciousness, and when the conditions for self-reflection are most naturally present. The reason for this timing is closely connected to everything we have just been exploring. Late-night REM is not only longer than the brief dreaming periods of the early cycles, it is also richer in the specific qualities that make lucidity possible. The plots are more elaborate and more internally consistent, creating the kind of narrative structure that can be recognized as a narrative. The brain's self-monitoring systems are more active at this stage than earlier in the night, producing more moments of self-reflection within the dream, more instances where the dreaming mind briefly turns its attention back on itself. And the frequency of natural, brief awakenings increases during these final cycles, creating moments when awareness can reassemble just enough to notice the dreaming state without breaking it entirely. This understanding has practical implications for those who wish to cultivate lucid dreaming. Techniques that involve waking briefly after several hours of sleep and then returning to bed are effective precisely because they place the returning sleeper at the entrance to this zone of extended, alert REM, their minds carrying just enough wakefulness into the dream to make recognition possible. Timing, it turns out, is not merely a convenience in the pursuit of lucid dreaming. It is a central part of why the practice works. Reality checks by day can carry into dream awareness. The practice of lucid dreaming requires building something into the mind that ordinary experience does not naturally develop: the habit of questioning whether the world around you is real. In waking life, this question almost never needs to be asked. The consistency of physical reality, the reliability of solid surfaces, of text that stays the same when read twice, of hands that look like hands, means that the need to verify the nature of one's experience simply never arises. The waking mind accepts reality because reality consistently behaves like reality. In dreams, this consistency fails. Surfaces don't always hold. Text shifts and rearranges when looked at again. Hands, when examined closely, may have the wrong number of fingers or edges that blur into uncertainty. The physical laws that govern waking experience become, in dreams, merely suggestions, and those departures from consistency are the very signals that can alert the dreaming mind to its own nature, if only it has learned to look for them. Reality checks are the tool for building this habit of looking. During waking hours, at regular intervals throughout the day, a person pauses and genuinely performs a simple test. Pressing a finger against the palm, reading a clock face twice, looking at a hand with real attention. The test is always performed as a genuine inquiry rather than a rhetorical gesture, with the actual intention of noticing whether the world responds as expected. In waking life, it always does. But the habit, practiced consistently over days and weeks, begins to embed itself deeply enough in the mind's automatic repertoire that it eventually surfaces during sleep. And when it does, the dream fails the test, and the failure is the spark. Research has confirmed that regular daytime reality testing measurably increases the frequency of lucid dreams. The habit of questioning reality is a habit that the sleeping mind can learn to carry, arriving in the dream not as a disruption, but as the natural expression of an attention that has been cultivated to notice what is actually happening. The mild technique primes the mind to notice dreaming. Among the techniques developed specifically for inducing lucid dreams, the mnemonic induction of lucid dreams, known by the acronym MILD and developed by sleep researcher Stephen LaBerge over decades of careful investigation, has accumulated some of the strongest evidence for effectiveness and remains one of the most widely practiced approaches for those new to conscious dreaming. The method begins at a natural awakening after several hours of sleep, when the final extended REM periods are approaching and the brain is closest to the alert, active state that favors lucidity. At this point, rather than returning immediately to sleep, the person spends a few minutes recalling a recent dream in as much detail as possible, rebuilding its imagery, retracing its sequence of events, reinstating the particular quality of its feeling. Then, as sleep is approached again, a simple intention is repeated with genuine focus. The next time I am dreaming, I will remember that I am dreaming. This intention is held in mind as the body relaxes, kept present as the mind begins its drift towards sleep, carried forward as a prospective memory into the upcoming dream cycle. What makes this technique work is not mysterious. It engages two things the brain does naturally and does well: rehearsing memories and carrying plans forward through time. By treating lucidity as a remembered intention rather than a hoped-for accident, MILD gives the dreaming mind something concrete to act on. Studies have found that the technique significantly increases the probability of lucid dreaming, particularly when combined with the brief middle-of-the-night awakening that places the sleeper at the optimal point in the night's architecture. For many people beginning their exploration of conscious dreaming, MILD offers the clearest and most accessible entry point available. WBB timing catches REM surges and boosts lucidity. Wake Back to Bed is among the most practically reliable methods for increasing the frequency of lucid dreams, and its logic becomes clear once the architecture of sleep is understood. The technique is straightforward in its design. After approximately 5 or 6 hours of sleep, when the body has addressed its most pressing need for deep restorative rest, and the night is shifting toward its extended REM-dominated final phase, the sleeper wakes intentionally, remains awake for a short period of light activity, and then returns to sleep. The period of wakefulness, typically between 20 minutes and an hour, is used gently and with purpose. Reading about dreaming, practicing intention setting, running through a mental rehearsal of the awareness one hopes to bring into the upcoming sleep. None of this needs to be intense or effortful. The goal is simply to raise the mind's alertness slightly above the baseline of ordinary sleep, so that when rest returns, that elevated awareness accompanies it into the dream. The return to sleep after this brief wakefulness drops the mind into REM almost immediately, because the body's accumulated sleep pressure has been sufficiently satisfied that it no longer needs to spend time in deep slow-wave stages. The dreaming mind, carrying just enough wakefulness to be a little more reflective than usual, enters one of the night's longest and most vivid REM periods. Studies consistently show that WBB, especially when combined with the intention setting of MILD, can significantly increase lucid dream success rates compared with either approach used alone. The brief interruption of continuous sleep asks something of the practitioner. But for those who have experienced the particular wonder of waking within a dream, the trade is, by almost universal report, more than worthwhile. SILD cycles senses to spark lucidity for some. Sense-initiated lucid dreaming, or SILD, takes an approach to conscious dreaming that differs meaningfully from both MILD and WBB in its underlying mechanism. Rather than working through memory rehearsal or intention setting, It works through a gentle, systematic cycling of sensory attention that appears to prime the brain for the kind of heightened perceptual awareness that can carry into the dreaming state and make lucidity more likely. The practice is deliberately simple. As the sleeper lies in bed after a middle-of-the-night awakening, attention moves slowly through the senses in sequence. First to whatever is present behind closed eyes, the ambient patterns of darkness, any faint phosphene activity, the quality of the visual field in its resting state. Then to sounds, whatever is present in the room or beyond it, attended to without judgment or analysis, simply noticed. Then to physical sensation, the weight of the body against the bed, the rhythm of breathing, the temperature of the air, the particular feeling of stillness. This cycle is repeated several times with a quality of light, curious attention that neither forces engagement nor allows the mind to drift entirely. The exercise appears to create a particular quality of awareness in the mind approaching sleep, a subtle heightening of perceptual sensitivity that, in favorable conditions, carries into the early stages of dreaming and creates the kind of noticing that can recognize the dream for what it is. Studies using SILD before returning to sleep after a brief awakening have found increased rates of lucid dreaming compared with control conditions. The technique works best when practiced with patience and without pressure, approached as a gentle ritual rather than a determined pursuit. The dream world, approached with demand, tends to recede. Approached with quiet, open attention, it sometimes opens. Galantamine can dramatically raise lucid dream success rates. Galantamine was developed as a treatment for memory decline in neurodegenerative conditions, working by inhibiting an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, thereby increasing the availability of this neurotransmitter throughout the brain. Acetylcholine, as we have explored earlier in this journey, plays a central role in the generation of vivid REM dreaming, rising sharply during the dreaming stage and supporting the cortical activity that produces the immersive imagery and narrative richness of sleep's most active hours. Sleep researchers who recognized this connection began investigating whether targeted supplementation with galantamine during the night might enhance not just the vividness of dreaming, but the specific capacity for lucid awareness within it. The results were striking. Studies using small doses taken during a middle-of-the-night awakening, typically combined with the WBTB method to maximize the effect, found lucid dream success rates more than doubling compared with the use of mental techniques alone. Dreamers not only became lucid more frequently, but reported longer and more vivid lucid dream experiences when they did. This finding matters beyond its practical application for those pursuing lucid dreaming. It demonstrates that the awareness we experience within a dream is not simply a function of practice or intention. It is also, at least in significant part, a function of the brain's chemical state, one that can be meaningfully altered by targeted intervention. It offers a window into the neurochemistry of consciousness itself, suggesting that the delicate balance of neurotransmitters that supports waking awareness can, under the right conditions, be extended into the dreaming state. The tool is not a casual one. Galantamine carries real potential for side effects and requires medical guidance. But the principle it reveals is quietly profound. Once lucid, dream control gets much easier with practice. The first experience of lucidity in a dream is frequently brief. The recognition, startling, unmistakable, arriving like a light suddenly switched on in a dark room. "I am dreaming," comes with a surge of excitement that the dreaming mind, overstimulated, cannot sustain. The dream destabilizes. The imagery begins to dissolve. Waking arrives before the experience has had time to develop into anything more than the recognition itself. The lucid dreamer returns to consciousness holding only the memory of a moment that lasted seconds, wanting intensely to find their way back. With practice, this changes. The initial volatility of lucidity settles as the dreaming mind becomes more familiar with the state, and less prone to disrupting it with the excitement of its own recognition. Experienced lucid dreamers develop what might be described as a technology of stabilization, a repertoire of physical actions performed within the dream that seem to anchor awareness and extend the experience. Rubbing the hands together to generate tactile sensation, spinning in place to reinforce the sense of embodied presence in the dream space, pressing the fingers against surfaces and attending carefully to their texture and resistance. These actions appear to engage the brain's sensory processing systems in ways that strengthen the dream's coherence, giving the awareness somewhere concrete to hold, while the initial excitement of lucidity settles into something more sustainable. Over time, with regular practice, the ability to remain lucid for extended periods develops, and with it, the capacity to navigate the dream deliberately, to direct attention toward chosen elements of the dream environment, to summon imagery and shape events with an intentionality that the ordinary dreaming mind never exercises. The dream world, it turns out, is responsive. It holds together best when approached not with the anxious grip of someone afraid to lose it, but with the steady, patient attention of someone who has learned to trust both the dream and their own capacity to remain present within it. Rehearsing skills in lucid dreams can feel strikingly real. Within the space of a lucid dream, the sensory experience of performing a physical skill can be difficult to distinguish from reality. The weight of an instrument, the specific resistance of the ground beneath a sprinting foot, the proprioceptive feedback of a movement executed with precision. All of these are present in the lucid dream with a vividness that the dreaming brain, running at its most active and most elaborately constructive, generates with remarkable fidelity. For those who have experienced it, the practice of a skill within a lucid dream does not feel like imagining practice. It feels, in most of the ways that matter experientially, like the thing itself. Brain imaging studies have given physiological substance to this subjective impression. During dreamed physical actions in lucid dreams, the motor cortex and related movement planning regions of the brain activate in patterns that closely resemble those produced by actual performance of the same actions while awake. The neural rehearsal is not metaphorical. The pathways that encode the skill are being traced and reinforced by genuine neural activity, even though the body that would carry out those movements remains entirely still. Whether this neural rehearsal translates into measurable improvement in waking performance is an area where research is still accumulating, with encouraging but not yet definitive findings. What is clear is that the dreaming brain treats imagined movement with a neurological seriousness that suggests the distinction between practiced and dreamed practice may be less absolute than it intuitively seems. The athlete who rehearses technique in a lucid dream, the musician who runs through a difficult passage, the speaker who delivers a speech before a dreamed audience, all are engaging the same neural substrates that waking performance requires, in a space where the consequences of error are nothing and the capacity for focused repetition is, in principle, unlimited. Lucid dreamers can dampen nightmares from the inside. For those whose sleep is regularly troubled by nightmares, the development of lucid dreaming skill offers something that most nightmare treatments cannot: the ability to intervene within the dream itself, at the moment the fear is being generated, rather than working with its residue from the outside afterward. When lucidity arrives in the middle of a nightmare, it brings with it the one thing the nightmare most effectively removes: the knowledge that what is happening is not real. This knowledge, even when it arrives in the midst of a fully convincing dream fear, changes the experience in fundamental ways. The recognition that the threatening figure is a dream figure, that the danger is dream danger, that the worst the situation can produce is the discomfort of the dream and not actual harm. This does not necessarily make the imagery pleasant, but it restores a degree of agency that ordinary nightmares entirely eliminate. The dreamer is no longer a helpless participant in a scenario they did not choose. They are an aware presence within it, with the capacity to redirect, to transform, to disengage. Studies have found that people who learn and practice lucid dreaming techniques report reductions in both the frequency and the distress of nightmares over time. The mechanism is partly cognitive. The recognition of unreality reduces the emotional charge, and partly behavioral, as experienced lucid dreamers learn to actively reshape the nightmare's elements rather than simply endure them. A threatening figure can be approached rather than fled from. A terrifying scene can be deliberately altered. The dream can be ended by a deliberate act of waking. For people whose nights have been defined by the particular helplessness of recurring nightmares, this capacity represents something genuinely meaningful. The possibility of meeting fear on its own ground, with awareness as the only tool required. Heart rate and breathing track dream emotions subtly. The body is still during sleep. The muscles are held by atonia. The physical self lies in apparent rest, giving no outward sign of what the dreaming mind is experiencing. And yet, beneath the surface of this stillness, the body's internal systems continue to respond, quietly, measurably, in ways that mirror the emotional life of the dream with a fidelity that researchers have now documented across many studies. Heart rate and breathing are the clearest and most consistently studied of these responses. A dream involving physical threat or pursuit tends to produce subtle accelerations in the heart's rhythm, not the full cardiovascular response of genuine danger, but a measurable quickening that reflects the dream's emotional content. A calm, peaceful dream scene tends to slow the breath, deepening it in ways that external monitors can detect and record. These are not large effects, and they would not be visible to casual observation, but they are real, consistent, and specifically linked to the emotional character of the dreaming experience rather than to the stage of sleep or the position of the body. In studies involving lucid dreamers, this connection has been demonstrated with particular elegance. When a lucid dreamer deliberately slows their breathing within the dream, performing an act of intentional calm in the dream environment, the effect appears on the external monitoring equipment exactly as the dreamer intended. A decision made within the dreaming mind produces a measurable physiological response in the sleeping body. The dream is not abstract. It does not stay contained within the brain. It ripples outward, leaving its trace in the body's most fundamental rhythms, showing, in the quietest and most persistent of ways, how deeply real the experience of dreaming actually is. Pupillary signals shift during REM like waking emotion. There is something quietly extraordinary about the finding that the pupils of a sleeping person, invisible behind closed eyelids, continue to respond to the emotional content of their dreams. In waking life, the pupils' responses to emotion are well established. Excitement and surprise cause dilation. Cognitive effort widens the pupil. Calm and disengagement allow it to narrow. These responses are involuntary expressions of the autonomic nervous system's moment-to-moment assessment of internal state. Researchers using infrared cameras capable of imaging through closed eyelids have found that this same responsiveness persists during dreaming sleep. When dream reports describe moments of fear or excitement, the pupils tend to be dilated. When the dream content is calm, they tend to constrict. These changes occur alongside the rapid eye movements that define REM sleep, providing yet another physiological channel through which the dreaming mind's interior life becomes, in small and measurable ways, visible to the outside world. The significance of this extends beyond methodology. It adds to the growing picture of dreaming as a state that is not merely experienced by the mind but lived by the whole body. A state in which genuine physiological responses accompany the emotional experiences of sleep in ways that parallel, at reduced intensity, the responses those same emotions would produce in waking life. The sleeping person is not absent from their emotions during dreaming. They are in them fully, and the body, invisible in the dark, echoes the feeling in the only ways that remain available to it. The hippocampus replays daytime routes during sleep. Deep within the brain, in the curved seahorse-shaped structure that has been at the center of memory research for decades, something remarkable takes place during the hours of sleep. The hippocampus, essential to the formation of new memories and to the navigation of physical and conceptual space, reactivates across the night the patterns of neural activity that occurred during the experiences of the day, playing them back in compressed form, rehearsing them, weaving them into the broader networks of long-term memory that make experience something that persists rather than simply passing through. In rodents, the precision of this replay has been documented with extraordinary detail. Neurons that fired in specific sequences as the animal navigated a maze during the day are found to fire in those same sequences during sleep, but compressed into a much shorter time span, as though the brain is running the maze again in fast motion, practicing the route at a pace that the waking experience could never achieve. Sometimes the replay runs forward, retracing the path from entrance to exit. Sometimes it runs backward, reviewing the route from finish to start, as though the brain is checking its work from a different angle, consolidating the spatial knowledge from every direction at once. In humans, similar patterns have been observed through brain imaging, suggesting that the same consolidation process is occurring, that the strange journeys of human dreams, the shifting locations and the illogical transitions, may partly reflect this underlying hippocampal activity, the day's experiences being rehearsed and reorganized in the sleeping mind's own compressed and associative language. What feels like a meaningless dream of wandering through unfamiliar buildings may be, at its neurological root, the hippocampus running the pathways of lived experience, strengthening the map of a life. Sleeping rats rehearse mazes step by step. The evidence for memory replay during sleep is nowhere more vividly illustrated than in the work done with rats navigating mazes. Research that has produced findings of a clarity and specificity that leave little room for ambiguity about what the sleeping brain is doing with the experiences of the day. In these experiments, rats learn to navigate a maze while researchers implant tiny electrodes that record the electrical activity of individual neurons in the hippocampus. As the rat moves through the maze, specific cells, called place cells, fire in sequences that correspond precisely to the locations being visited. Each stretch of the maze has its neural signature, its own particular pattern of cellular activity that the recording system captures as the animal moves through. When the rat sleeps, those same cells fire again. The same sequences, the same order, the same spatial narrative compressed into a fraction of the time, as though the maze is being traversed again, not in space but in neural pattern, at a speed that the physical navigation could never achieve. Sometimes the sequence reverses, replaying the maze from end to beginning with the same precision. These reactivations occur during sharp-wave ripples, characteristic bursts of synchronized hippocampal activity that are strongly associated with memory consolidation, and their behavioral consequences visible in the animal's subsequent performance, which improves reliably after sleep that includes robust replay. The quiet hours are not idle. The brain is practicing, in the dark, what the body learned in the light. Birds practice their songs at night like lessons. The finding that memory replay during sleep extends beyond mammals to birds has added a dimension to our understanding of why this process exists at all, suggesting that it is not an accident of mammalian brain architecture, but something more fundamental. A principle of learning so basic and so useful that evolution has arrived at it independently, or preserved it from a very deep common ancestry. Young birds learning to sing face a challenge that has interesting parallels to human language acquisition. They must take a model, the song of an adult tutor, and gradually approximate it through practice, refining the timing, the pitch, the structure, until the song emerges as a recognizable version of what they heard. This learning happens during waking practice sessions, but it does not stop when the bird rests. Researchers recording the neural activity of young birds during sleep find the same motor sequences that occurred during daytime, singing being replayed through the sleeping brain, sometimes with such completeness that faint vocalizations accompany the replay, the sleeping bird making the ghost of its song beneath its breath. When recordings of the tutor's song are played to sleeping birds, their neural activity shifts in ways that suggest active integration. The sleeping brain not merely rehearsing what it already knows, but reaching toward the model, adjusting its representation in the direction of what it has heard. By morning, the practice song can be measurably more refined, shaped by a night of neural work that the bird performed entirely in its sleep. For birds as for rats, as for humans, the night is a continuation of the day's learning, the brain completing, in rest, work that wakefulness has begun. Octopuses show color-changing sleep that looks dreamlike. Among all the findings in the comparative study of sleep and dreaming, few are more visually striking or more philosophically intriguing than the behavior of sleeping octopuses. An octopus at rest, in the right phase of its sleep cycle, puts on a performance that no audience requested and that no apparent purpose in the external world seems to explain. Its skin ripples through cascading waves of color and pattern, pale, then mottled, then dark, then banded, shifting through the same repertoire of camouflage and communication patterns that it uses in waking life, but directed at nothing, in apparent response to nothing, while the animal itself is by all observable. Criteria deeply asleep. The movements of the eyes beneath closed lids, the occasional brief muscular contractions, the shifting chromatophores painting patterns across the sleeping body. All of these have led researchers to identify what they call an active sleep state in cephalopods, comparable in some respects to REM sleep in mammals. Some scientists have proposed that the color changes reflect dream content, that the octopus is replaying the visual experiences of its waking day. The specific patterns used to hide from a predator, the colors deployed in a territorial encounter, the precise chromatic sequence of a successful hunt. Others suggest the activity may represent neural recalibration rather than experiential replay, the visual system running through its full range of patterns as a form of maintenance rather than memory. What we cannot do, of course, is ask. The octopus keeps its experience, whatever it is, entirely to itself. But the visible display offers something valuable nonetheless, a glimpse into an interior life whose existence we might otherwise never have suspected, carried by a creature whose nervous system is organized so differently from our own that its capacity for anything resembling dream experience had not been seriously considered until researchers began watching it sleep. Some reptiles display REM-like sleep cycles, too. For much of the history of sleep science, the capacity for REM-like sleep was understood to be a feature of warm-blooded animals, mammals and birds, whose metabolically expensive, high-activity brains seem to require the particular restorative and consolidating functions that this stage of sleep provides. Reptiles, with their slower metabolisms and their brains organized along older evolutionary lines, were generally considered unlikely candidates for anything resembling the active, dream-associated sleep of their more complex relatives. Recent research has challenged this assumption in ways that carry significant implications for how we understand the origins of dreaming itself. Studies using miniaturized electrodes implanted in sleeping lizards have revealed alternating sleep states that include periods of high-frequency brain activity accompanied by eye movements beneath closed lids, a signature that, in mammals, is precisely what we call REM sleep. Whether these states are accompanied by any form of subjective experience in the lizard's brain, whether there is something it is like to be a dreaming reptile, is a question that the available methods cannot answer. But the physiological marker is present. If the capacity for REM-like activity extends as far back as the evolutionary lineage of reptiles, it pushes the origins of dreaming hundreds of millions of years into the past. to a time before the divergence of the lineages that would eventually produce both birds and mammals, when the ancestors of all of today's land vertebrates were still a single population. The dream, if this interpretation holds, is not a recent luxury of large mammalian brains. It is a very old feature of nervous systems, perhaps one of the oldest forms of internally generated experience that life on Earth has ever produced. Newborns spend a huge share of sleep in REM. A newborn baby sleeps for the majority of its early existence, often 16 hours or more out of every 24. And of that sleep, an extraordinary proportion, roughly half, is spent in what appears to be REM. In adults, who typically allocate around 20% of their sleep to this stage, such a figure would be remarkable. In a newborn, it reflects something about the developmental urgency of the earliest weeks of life that no other single observation captures more clearly. The brain of a newborn is not a complete brain. It is a brain in the early stages of an extraordinary construction project, forming new neural connections at a rate that will never again be matched, establishing the pathways that will eventually support everything the person will ever think, feel, learn, or do. The sensory experience available to a newborn for driving this construction is, by the standards of what will become available later, limited. The world is present, but the systems for processing it are still being built. The abundant REM sleep of early infancy may provide what waking experience cannot yet fully supply. Internally generated neural activity that stimulates the developing circuits, exercising them, helping to shape and strengthen the connections that will define the brain's fundamental architecture. The small movements visible in a sleeping infant, the twitching of a finger, the flickering of expression across an otherwise still face, the occasional small vocalization that seems to emerge from nowhere, are the body's traces of this internal activity, sparks from a brain that is intensely, urgently at work, building itself in the dark of sleep with a dedication that the quiet exterior of a sleeping baby gives no hint of. Human fetuses show REM-like activity before birth. Before the first breath, before the first encounter with the sensory world that will shape a lifetime of waking experience, the developing human brain is already practicing. Ultrasound studies of fetuses in the later months of pregnancy have revealed sleep cycles that include periods of rapid eye movement, bursts of neural activity in patterns that resemble REM, and limb movements in the apparent absence of any external stimulus, as though the body is responding to something that exists only in the activity of the brain itself. The fetal brain has limited access to the external sensory input that will later be the primary driver of neural development. It cannot yet see or hear or move freely through space, and yet its nervous system must be ready for all of these things by the time birth arrives. The internally generated activity of fetal REM-like sleep may be the brain's solution to this problem, a way of exercising the developing circuits, of providing the stimulation that sensory experience would normally supply, of rehearsing the processing of light and sound and movement before any of those things have been encountered. Some researchers have suggested that the fetus may experience something that, in its most primitive form, resembles sensation, not the organized sensory experience of later life, but perhaps flashes of warmth, of rhythm, of undifferentiated brightness, generated not from the world, but from the brain's own activity. Whether these constitute anything like dreaming in a meaningful sense remains an open question. But the activity that produces them is unmistakable, and its purpose, preparing the nervous system for a world it has not yet met, is one of the most profound examples of the brain's extraordinary capacity for self-organization. Dogs twitch as dream commands leak past paralysis. Anyone who has spent time with a dog has almost certainly witnessed the unmistakable signs of a dog that is dreaming. The legs that begin to paddle in the rhythm of running. The soft whimper or brief bark that seems to come from somewhere other than the room. The nose that twitches with apparent urgency, responding to a scent that exists in no physical space. the paws that curl and press as though against the resistance of solid ground. These small, involuntary movements are among the most recognizable signs that the dreaming state is active, and they tell us something real about what is happening in the sleeping dog's brain. During REM sleep, the same inhibitory circuits that hold the human body still during dreaming are active in dogs as well. Signals from the brainstem that suppress the motor neurons and prevent dream commands from becoming physical actions. But as we have seen throughout this exploration, the system is not absolute. Small signals leak through. In humans, these leakages appear as the faint twitches of fingers or the flutter of eyelids. In dogs, whose motor systems are wired somewhat differently and whose physical movements during waking are more large-scale and more expressive, the leakages can be correspondingly more visible. A whole leg moving, a paw pressing, the body making the beginning of a movement that the dream has called for. The behavior reveals something about the interior life of sleeping dogs that their daytime behavior alone cannot. We cannot ask a dog what it dreamed. We cannot access the specific content of the images and scenarios that its sleeping brain constructs. But the twitching leg and the running paw are the body's honest testimony. Fragments of motor command sent by a brain that is, in some form of experience, genuinely going somewhere. The nights of our animals, like our own, appear to be full of vivid life. Elephants sleep little and have sparse REM. We have been tracing the presence of sleep and dreaming across the animal kingdom. Through the paddling paws of sleeping dogs, the color-rippling skin of resting octopuses, the neural replays of sleeping birds and rats. Each of these findings has pushed the boundaries of what we understand dreaming to be, and where in the living world it might be found. The elephant pushes those boundaries in a different direction entirely, not by demonstrating dreaming's unexpected presence, but by raising quiet questions about its apparent absence, and about what that absence might mean. In the wild, elephants may sleep as little as 2 to 4 hours in any given 24-hour period, less than any other land mammal yet studied. Much of this rest is taken standing, the body supported by skeletal structure, rather than requiring the full muscular relaxation that deeper sleep demands. True REM sleep, which requires a physical stillness that the standing position cannot provide, appears to occur only when an elephant lies fully on its side. And in the wild, this may happen only once every few days, lasting perhaps an hour when it does. The contrast with everything we have explored about the brain's apparent need for dreaming sleep is striking. Here is an animal of extraordinary cognitive sophistication, navigating vast territories from memory across decades, maintaining complex multi-generational social bonds, expressing behaviors that researchers have associated with grief, joy, and playfulness, demonstrating problem-solving abilities that continue to surprise the scientists who study them. And this animal, by most measures, barely dreams at all. What the elephant offers us is a challenge to assumptions we might not have known we were making. If extended REM sleep is essential for complex memory, emotional processing, and cognitive flexibility, how does a species that sleeps so briefly manage all three with such apparent success? Some researchers suggest that the elephant's non-REM sleep may perform consolidation, work that other species accomplish during REM. Others note that we may be measuring something narrower than we realize, that the dreamlike functions of sleep may take forms in the elephant's brain that our current methods are not equipped to recognize. What the elephant reminds us, in any case, is that there is no single blueprint for how an intelligent nervous system restores itself at night. Evolution finds many paths to the same destination. Dolphins sleep one hemisphere at a time, making dreaming tricky. If the elephant challenges our assumptions about the relationship between dreaming and intelligence, the dolphin challenges them about the relationship between dreaming and the sea itself. About what happens to the architecture of sleep when survival demands that rest and vigilance coexist without interruption. Dolphins must breathe air. They must surface regularly, even while resting, or they will drown. And yet they also need to sleep. The solution their nervous systems have arrived at is one of the most elegant adaptations in the biology of sleep: unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, in which one hemisphere of the brain enters a resting state while the other remains fully active, alert enough to maintain the continuous swimming and surfacing that life in open water requires. One eye stays open, monitoring the environment. The body keeps moving. Half the brain rests while half keeps watch, and then they switch. This arrangement handles the needs of slow-wave sleep effectively, but it creates a genuine puzzle when it comes to REM. The vivid, emotionally active dreaming of REM sleep, as we have explored throughout this journey, is typically accompanied by full-body atonia, the paralysis that prevents dream commands from becoming physical actions. A dolphin in full REM paralysis would be a dolphin that had stopped swimming, stopped surfacing, stopped breathing. The consequence would be fatal. Studies suggest that dolphins may experience very brief, fragmentary periods of something resembling REM, possibly measured in seconds rather than minutes, squeezed into the cycling of their unusual sleep architecture in ways that have not yet been fully characterized. Some researchers believe these brief episodes may carry something like dreamlike imagery, but in a form that would be difficult to recognize as such from the outside, and that may be fundamentally different from the extended, narrative REM dreaming of land mammals. Others suggest that dolphins may have evolved to accomplish the functions of REM through mechanisms that leave no recognizable signature, that their brains may have found a different answer to the same problem. In the ocean's vast and pressured expanse, the need to survive may have quietly reshaped even the very nature of dreaming. The paradoxical sleep name reflects an active sleeping brain. REM sleep has a second name, one given to it by the researchers who first began to understand what was happening within it, and who found, in that understanding, something that seemed to require a word that acknowledged its fundamental strangeness. They called it paradoxical sleep, and the name, once you understand the reason for it, feels exactly right. To observe a person in REM sleep from the outside is to see every sign of deep, complete unconsciousness. The body is still. The muscles are relaxed to the point of limpness. The breathing is regular, the face composed, the exterior presentation of the sleeping person entirely consistent with the deepest possible rest. And then you look at the brain activity, at the patterns of electrical oscillation being traced across the monitoring equipment, and you find something that should not be there. Fast, complex, richly varied neural rhythms that look, in their essential character, almost exactly like the patterns produced by a brain that is awake, alert, and actively engaged with the world. The discovery of this paradox, made by researchers in the 1950s as the tools for measuring brain activity during sleep first became available, was one of the genuinely unsettling moments in the history of neuroscience. The assumption had been that sleep was essentially a quieting, that what the brain did in sleep was less than what it did in waking. The discovery of REM reversed this completely, revealing that sleep contained a state in which the brain was not quieter than waking but differently active, as engaged and as energetically alive as it was in the most alert moments of the day, but directed entirely inward, working on something whose nature we are still working to fully understand. The paradox at the heart of REM sleep is, in this sense, the paradox at the heart of dreaming itself. A state that looks like absence but is, in every meaningful neurological sense, a profound and active presence. REM atonia is built by brain stem and spinal circuits. The stillness of the dreaming body is not a passive absence of movement. It is something actively and continuously produced, a state of suppression maintained by dedicated neural circuitry that works, through every moment of REM sleep, to ensure that the motor commands generated by the dreaming brain do not translate into physical action. The mechanism has been traced to circuits in the brain stem and spinal cord that, during REM sleep, send powerful inhibitory signals downward along the pathways that would normally carry movement commands from the brain to the muscles. These signals silence the motor neurons, not by destroying them or even by reducing their readiness, but by actively blocking the transmission of commands that the dreaming brain is, in many cases, genuinely generating. The brain may be instructing the body to run, to reach, to speak, and the inhibitory system intercepts those instructions before they can arrive. The elegance of this arrangement becomes most visible when it fails. In animals whose autonomous circuits have been experimentally disabled, the dream is no longer contained. Cats crouch and spring. Rodents appear to chase or flee from threats that exist only in their sleeping brains. The behavior is unmistakable, and once you understand what you are watching, deeply illuminating. A dreaming brain expressing itself without the usual constraints, showing in physical form what the dreaming mind was constructing. For researchers, these observations have provided some of the most direct evidence available for what dreams actually contain, and have underscored how much work the autonomous system normally does, every night, to keep the dream safely where it belongs. The amygdala runs hot while executive control quiets. At the center of the emotional drama of dreaming sits one of the brain's most ancient and most studied structures. The amygdala, a small, almond-shaped region buried deep in the temporal lobe that serves as the brain's primary processor of emotional significance, and particularly of fear. During REM sleep, the amygdala is unusually, sometimes intensely active. It is, in a meaningful sense, the engine of the dream's emotional life, generating the urgency, the fear, the grief, the sudden joy that makes dreaming feel so undeniably real, even when the events being experienced are impossible. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational overseer, its enforcer of logical consistency, the region most responsible for the evaluative thinking that keeps ordinary experience grounded, grows comparatively quiet. The logical editor that would ordinarily intercept an emotional response and contextualize it, moderate it, provide it with perspective, has stepped back from its usual post. What remains is the raw emotional experience, unmediated and full. Some researchers believe this particular configuration, emotional centers fully active, logical control reduced, is not merely an incidental feature of sleep, but a functional arrangement that serves the brain's emotional housekeeping. By allowing emotional memories to be revisited at full intensity, without the physical consequences that the same emotions would produce in waking life, the dreaming state may be creating the conditions for a kind of processing that waking experience cannot offer. Complete emotional engagement in the absence of real stakes, the feeling without the consequence, the experience of something difficult in a space where it can be survived. The dream, in this reading, is not where the brain avoids emotion. It is where the brain finally gives emotion the room it needs. The prefrontal cortex quiets, metacognition drops, and dreams feel real. There is a reason that flying in a dream feels completely real while it is happening. That meeting a person who died years ago feels not like a memory or a fantasy, but like an encounter. That the impossible geography of the dreamscape, rooms that open into other rooms in ways that violate the physical dimensions of any building, landscapes that shift without transition, distances that collapse or expand according to no consistent rule, is accepted without the slightest sense of incongruity while the dream lasts. The reason is the prefrontal cortex, and specifically its comparative quietness during dreaming sleep. This region of the brain, the seat of executive function, of planning, of self-awareness, and most relevantly of metacognition, the capacity to think about thinking, significantly reduces its activity during REM. And in its reduced state, the mental function it normally provides is correspondingly diminished. The ability to step back from experience and evaluate it, to notice when something doesn't add up, to ask the question that would immediately end any dream, is this real? Without that question being asked, the dream proceeds with the full force of reality. The emotional systems running at their most active provide the conviction. The logical systems that would normally provide the counterbalance are quiet. The result is experience that feels, in every moment of its unfolding, as real as anything the waking world has ever offered. Lucid dreaming is, in neurological terms, exactly what happens when the prefrontal cortex partially reactivates, when the self-reflective function returns just enough to ask the question that changes everything. With practice, this reactivation can be trained and extended, giving the dreamer the capacity to maintain awareness inside the dream without waking from it. To inhabit the dream's full sensory reality, while simultaneously knowing, with a clarity that ordinary dreaming never allows, that it is a dream. Theta rhythms help bind scenes into a dream narrative. Within the brain's electrical activity during sleep, certain rhythmic patterns take on roles that go beyond simply characterizing the state of the sleeping mind. Theta rhythms, relatively slow oscillations that arise during states of active memory work, deep focus, and the recall of personal experience, appear during sleep to serve a specific and valuable binding function, gathering the scattered fragments of memory, emotion, and sensation that the dreaming brain has assembled and weaving them into the flowing, continuous experience we recognize as a dream. Without this integrating activity, the components of a dream might remain disconnected. A face without a context, a location without a story, a feeling without an image to anchor it. What the dreamer experiences as a single continuous narrative, with its own internal logic and its own emotional arc, may depend in significant part on the theta rhythm's capacity to draw these elements together, creating the sense of temporal flow that turns a collection of impressions into something that feels like an experience being lived through. Studies linking stronger theta activity during sleep to more vivid and more coherently recalled dreams support this interpretation. The rhythm appears to act as a kind of conductor, guiding the different elements of the dream's orchestra toward a shared timing, making the conversation that happened yesterday, the place remembered from childhood, and the worry that arrived this morning find their way into a single scene that carries something of all three. The strangeness of dream connections is not chaos. It is coherence of a different kind, organized by rhythms that follow emotional and associative logic rather than the logic of time and space. Slow waves gate, which outside cues get woven in. Throughout this long exploration, we have returned many times to the question of how much the sleeping brain remains open to the world outside it. And the answer consistently has been more than we might expect, but in ways that are carefully regulated. The slow waves of non-REM sleep offer one of the clearest illustrations of this regulation in action. These large, rolling oscillations of electrical activity, characteristic of the deep sleep stages that dominate the first half of the night, alternate rhythmically between peaks of relatively high neural activity and troughs of comparative quiet. Researchers have found that this alternation creates a corresponding rhythm in the brain's receptivity to outside stimuli. During the active peaks of the slow wave, sensory signals from the environment have a measurably higher probability of being registered and processed, and therefore of being incorporated into the dreaming narrative. During the quieter troughs, the same signal may pass entirely unnoticed, filtered out before it can reach the dreaming mind's attention. This gating mechanism appears to serve a dual purpose. It protects the sleeping brain from unnecessary disturbance, maintaining the continuity of rest against the constant low-level noise of any occupied environment. And it ensures that genuinely significant signals, sudden loud sounds, the calling of a name, stimuli that cross a certain threshold of relevance or intensity, still have a path through, even during the deepest phases of sleep. Researchers who understand this rhythm can time their interventions to the receptive peaks, increasing the probability that a chosen cue will be absorbed and acted upon by the sleeping brain. The gate is not open or closed. It pulses rhythmically, letting the world in and keeping it out in alternating waves. Smells nudge dream mood without appearing as smells. We have spoken before, in this exploration, about the special relationship between smell and the brain's emotional and memory systems, about how the olfactory pathway connects more directly to the limbic regions than any other sense, bypassing the relay stations that other senses must pass through and arriving at the seat of feeling with an immediacy that gives smell its particular power. This connection, we noted, does not close during sleep, and one of its most interesting expressions is the way that smell influences the dreaming mind without ever making itself known as smell. Experiments introducing pleasant scents, roses, clean air, the soft fragrance of something familiar and associated with comfort, into the sleeping environment have found consistent effects on the emotional quality of the dreams that follow. Not on their content in any specific way. The dreamer does not dream of flowers or of the source of the scent. Instead, the dream's overall emotional atmosphere shifts, becoming softer, less threatening, warmer in its feeling. A nightmare becomes less frightening without any of its imagery changing. A neutral dream takes on a quality of ease that it would not otherwise have carried. Unpleasant scents produce the opposite effect, introducing a shadow of unease or anxiety into whatever dream is unfolding, darkening the atmosphere without populating it with any specific threatening imagery. The smell arrives at the emotional center of the sleeping brain and tunes the frequency of the dream's feeling, without the conscious dreaming mind ever knowing it was there. It is perhaps the most invisible influence on the dreaming world that we have encountered in this entire exploration. A reminder that the dreams we believe are entirely our own creation are being quietly shaped from outside the closed eyes in ways we will never detect. A gentle tap can appear as a door knock. Touch, like sound and scent, finds its way into the dreaming mind, but it does so through the same transformative mechanism that all of these inputs share. The dreaming brain does not simply register a sensation and report it. It explains it. It builds a story around it. It incorporates the signal into the ongoing narrative as seamlessly as though it had always been part of the plan. A light pressure applied to the hand during sleep becomes, in the dream, the feeling of holding something that matters to the story. A tap on the shoulder becomes a knock on a door, or the touch of a hand from behind, or the particular sensation of contact that the dream's own logic needs at precisely that moment. Sleep laboratory experiments in which carefully calibrated tactile stimuli are applied to sleeping volunteers and then compared to their dream reports upon waking have found consistent correspondences. The touch arrives in the dream transformed, its physical modality preserved but its source and meaning entirely reimagined to fit the story already being told. What this reveals is something we have been circling throughout this exploration. The dreaming brain is not a passive receiver of experience, not a record player playing back whatever has been stored, but an active interpreter, continuously and creatively working to maintain a coherent narrative from whatever material presents itself, internal and external alike. The outside world knocks on the door of the dream, and the dream answers it, always, in its own language. An alarm often morphs into a phone ringing in the dream. Of all the moments in which the dreaming brain's commitment to narrative coherence becomes directly and personally visible, perhaps the most universal is the alarm clock that enters the dream before it wakes the dreamer. The ringing arrives, and for a few seconds, sometimes longer, it is not an alarm. It is a phone call in the dream, insistent and somehow important, or a doorbell, suggesting someone at the door of the dream's location, or a bell in a tower, or a siren in a distance, or any number of other sounds that belong naturally in whatever world the dream has been constructing. The mechanism is by now familiar. The dreaming brain, receiving a sound that does not belong to its current story, does what it always does with signals it cannot ignore. It finds a place for it, rapidly and convincingly, within the narrative already underway. The story continues, incorporating the intrusion as though it had been planned. The dreamer moves through the dream version of the alarm's meaning, answering the imagined phone, moving toward the imagined door, until the sound's persistence, its failure to resolve into anything the dream can complete, finally allows waking consciousness to reassemble itself around the alarm's actual nature. That moment of recognition, the shift from the dream phone to the alarm clock, from the imagined doorbell to the insistent buzzing on the bedside table, is one of the most vivid illustrations of just how thin and porous the boundary between dreaming and waking can be. The brain was protecting the dream. It was doing everything in its power to maintain the story just a little longer. And for those few seconds of incorporation, it succeeded. Learning before bed makes related dreams more likely. The material of the day does not simply wait to be processed during sleep. It begins entering the dreaming hours almost immediately, and the content of what was learned, practiced, or engaged with in the hours before bed has a notably elevated probability of appearing, in some transformed form, in the dreams of the night that follows. People who spend their evening hours with specific material, practicing a piece of music, working through the logic of a problem, engaging with the patterns of a new skill or a complex subject, frequently find echoes of that engagement in their dreams. The dreams rarely replay the experience directly. They remix it, as we have explored, placing fragments of the material in new contexts, surrounding it with other imagery, finding unexpected arrangements that the deliberate waking engagement with the subject would never have produced. But the connection to the evening's activity is unmistakable, and it is not coincidental. What makes this more than merely interesting is the relationship between these dream appearances and the following day's performance. People who dream about material they have been learning tend to perform measurably better on related tasks in the morning, as though the dream's work with the material has found a better arrangement for it, strengthened the pathways that the waking practice began to establish, done something to the knowledge that the practice alone could not accomplish. The night continues the lesson. Sleep is not the pause between learning sessions. It is, in a real sense, one of them. The Tetris effect spills game patterns straight into dreams. Spend enough hours with any sufficiently absorbing visual and repetitive activity, and the dreaming mind will eventually claim it. This phenomenon, observed most famously and most consistently in the context of the block-arranging game Tetris, whose distinctive falling shapes have appeared in the dreams of players in studies specifically designed to document the effect, tells us something direct and important about how the brain uses sleep to process the residue of waking engagement. The shapes arrive not as complete narrative dreams, but as fragments and impressions, visual echoes of the activity, the same patterns cycling through the hypnagogic imagery at the edge of sleep, surfacing in brief dream flashes as the brain runs through the visual processing it most recently and most intensively performed. The phenomenon is not limited to games. Skiers dream of slopes, chess players see boards and pieces, surgeons learning new procedures report the visual patterns of their training reappearing in the night's imagery. What the activity was matters less than the fact that the brain was deeply engaged with it. Particularly striking is the finding that even people with certain forms of memory impairment, who cannot consciously recall having played the game, who have no explicit memory of the activity, still report the dream imagery of falling blocks. The Tetris effect does not depend on declarative memory. It arises from the procedural and visual processing systems that operate below the level of conscious recall. Systems that continue their work during sleep regardless of whether the waking mind can access the record of what they were working on. What we do before sleep does not stop at the moment of closing our eyes. The brain carries it forward, processing it in the dark in the only language the dreaming mind knows: images, patterns, and the logic of repetition. Dreaming can boost creative problem solving by morning. The history of creative discovery is full of dreams. August Kekule's vision of a snake biting its own tail, which gave him the ring structure of benzene. Paul McCartney waking with the melody of yesterday already fully formed, searching for a nearby instrument before it could dissolve. Dmitri Mendeleev, who reportedly dreamed the arrangement of the periodic table. These stories have the quality of myth, and some of them carry embellishments that careful history has reason to question. But the underlying phenomenon they point toward is real, documented in laboratory studies, and grounded in what we now understand about how the dreaming brain processes information. During sleep, and particularly during REM, the brain's usual rules of association are loosened. The prefrontal systems that constrain waking thought, that evaluate combinations for their likelihood, dismiss connections that seem too distant, enforce the logical consistency of ongoing reasoning, are quiet. The associative networks that link memories, concepts, and experiences operate more freely, following emotional and thematic resonance rather than logical adjacency. Distant ideas that the waking mind would never bring together can find each other in the dream's more permissive space, and the combinations that result can carry, when examined in the morning, a quality of insight that the more constrained waking approach could not reach. Studies have confirmed this effect experimentally. People who sleep on a problem before attempting to solve it show significantly higher rates of creative insight than those who remain awake for the same duration. The sleep appears to incubate something, not by providing a direct answer, but by creating conditions in which the mind can find pathways that deliberate, directed thinking keeps closing off. The dream is not a shortcut to creativity. It is the brain's own long way around, the path through the night that sometimes arrives at a place the direct route could never reach. Targeted memory reactivation strengthens chosen memories overnight. We have explored throughout this journey how the sleeping brain's consolidation of memory is not simply a passive settling of what has been learned, but an active, responsive process that can be influenced by carefully chosen signals introduced during sleep. Targeted memory reactivation is the name researchers have given to the technique that most directly demonstrates this influence, and its results are among the most practically significant to emerge from the science of sleep in recent years. The method begins with learning paired with a distinctive sound, a specific tone played softly while a person studies a set of word pairs, or practices the layout of a visual pattern, or engages with any material that the experiment is designed to strengthen. The association is formed naturally and without deliberate effort. This sound belongs to this learning. Then, during sleep, the same sound is played at a volume below the threshold of waking, quiet enough not to disturb rest, present enough to be registered by the dreaming brain's still active auditory system. The brain, encountering the familiar sound in the context of consolidation active sleep, reactivates the memory network associated with it. The consolidation of that specific material is deepened, the pathways strengthened, the morning recall improved, measurably, consistently, without the person knowing that anything occurred during the night. The rest of the night's learning proceeds normally. Only the cued memory receives the extra consolidation. What this demonstrates is something with implications far beyond the laboratory. The sleeping brain is selective, responsive, and open to guidance. The night is not a uniform process of passive retention. It is a dynamic, sensitive operation that can be steered, with appropriate care and appropriate subtlety, toward the specific memories that most need to be carried forward. Targeted dream incubation can steer hypnagogic themes. The ancient practice of dream incubation, of setting an intention before sleep and hoping that the dreaming mind would take it up and explore it through the night, has found a new and more precise form in the hands of researchers working at the intersection of sleep science and wearable technology. Where the ancient practitioner could only prepare their mind and wait, the modern version of the practice can detect the exact moment when the sleeping mind is most receptive and deliver its chosen prompt with a timing that the unaided human can never achieve. Using sensors that monitor the physiological signatures of the transition into sleep, the slowing of breathing, the loosening of muscle tone, the subtle shifts in the body's electrical activity that mark the approach of hypnagogia. A wearable device identifies the precise moment when the mind is balanced at the most suggestible threshold. At that moment, a soft auditory cue is delivered, a single word or a brief phrase, chosen in advance by the sleeper as the theme they wish to carry into the night. The word arrives in the hypnagogic space where brief, luminous dream fragments are already forming, and it seeds those fragments with its own associative possibilities. In early experiments, the chosen themes appear in the resulting dream imagery with a frequency that exceeds what chance would predict. Dreams linked to the cued word carry an associative richness and an originality that undirected dreaming does not consistently produce. As though the dreaming mind, given a starting point, explores it with a creativity that directed waking thought cannot fully access. The possibility that this technology opens, of regularly, gently, and specifically shaping the direction of the mind's nightly creative work, is one of the most intriguing frontiers in the science of dreaming, and one whose full implications are only beginning to come into view. Brain-computer links have captured dream answers in real time. We began this long exploration with one of the most striking discoveries in the history of sleep science: that researchers have managed to hold real conversations with people who were fully asleep and dreaming. As we draw toward the end of our journey, it is worth returning to this finding and sitting with it a little longer, because the more you understand about everything else we have covered, the more extraordinary it becomes. A person is asleep. Their brain is in the most active and most private of the sleep stages, generating a complete, immersive, internally consistent world that exists only in their sleeping mind. They have, by the agreed-upon signal of prearranged eye movements, indicated that they know they are dreaming, that they have achieved the rare state of lucidity that makes communication possible. And then, from outside the dream, a question arrives. Not as a voice from nowhere, but as a soft sound, a carefully timed sensory cue that the dreaming mind receives and the dreaming person processes. And from within the dream, using only the movement of their eyes, they respond. The answer travels back across the boundary, picked up by the monitoring equipment, decoded by the watching researchers. The exchange is simple: a number, a yes or a no, a signal that something was received and understood. But the simplicity is not the point. The point is that it happened at all. That the boundary between dreaming and waking, which we have long thought of as absolute, as the most complete form of inaccessibility the living mind ever achieves, turns out to be permeable in both directions. The sleeping mind can be reached, and it can reach back. What the full implications of this are for our understanding of consciousness, of awareness, of the nature of the dreaming state itself, remains to be discovered. But the conversation has begun. People rarely write or read text cleanly in dreams. The unreliability of written text in dreams is one of the dreaming world's most consistent and most practically useful peculiarities. Dream text shifts. Letters rearrange themselves when looked at again. Clock faces present numbers that don't hold still. A page that seemed to contain legible words dissolves on second glance into something that resembles writing but carries no meaning. For lucid dreamers, this instability has become one of the most dependable reality checks available. Find something written in the dream, look at it twice, and if it changes, you are dreaming. The neurological reason for this is grounded in the specific systems that language processing depends on. Reading, really reading, producing consistent recognition of written symbols in a reliable sequence, requires the sustained, coordinated activity of regions in the brain's left hemisphere that are significantly less active during REM sleep than during waking. The dreaming brain can approximate the appearance of written text, can produce something that looks like a page or a sign or a message, but it cannot maintain the precise, sequential symbolic processing that stable text requires. The appearance is there, The underlying machinery that would make it consistent is running at reduced capacity. This tells us something interesting about the relationship between language and dreaming more broadly. Dreams favor the older, more associative, more emotionally direct forms of meaning: images, spatial relationships, the felt quality of an encounter, over the more recently developed, more precisely rule-governed medium of written language. The dream world communicates in a way that predates writing, using the brain's most ancient means of making sense of experience. Language, for all its power in waking life, is a relatively thin layer over something much deeper, and in sleep, the deeper layer reasserts itself. Mirrors and faces often warp as self-models get unstable. The face in the dream mirror is rarely quite right. It flickers, or it shifts, or it carries features that belong to someone else or to a version of the self that doesn't correspond to the one that the waking mirror reflects each morning. The faces of others in dreams can be equally unstable, blending, transforming, carrying the identity of one person in the physical features of another, refusing to hold still in the way that faces in waking life reliably do. This instability is not random. It reflects something specific about what the dreaming brain can and cannot maintain: the stable, consistent recognition of a particular face, and even more, the stable sense of one's own appearance, one's own face as a fixed and known thing, depends on the coordinated activity of face recognition systems and the prefrontal regions that normally keep these representations consistent and grounded. During dreaming, with the prefrontal oversight reduced, this coordination loosens. The face recognition system operates with what it has: fragments of remembered features, emotional associations, the accumulated impressions of many encounters, but without the same quality control that waking perception applies. The result is faces that are assembled from memory rather than recognized from a stable template, and that shift as the dream's emotional logic shifts the emphasis from one stored feature to another. The self-image in the dream mirror is not a reflection but a construction, and like all of the dream's constructions, it follows the logic of feeling rather than the logic of stable physical fact. What we take for granted each morning, the fixed, familiar face that looks back from the glass, is, in the dream's more honest rendering, revealed as something far more fragile: a mental model, held together by the waking brain's continuous active effort, and only as stable as that effort remains. Out-of-body sensations can arise from REM intrusions. Some of the most striking and most philosophically provocative experiences that the dreaming mind can produce involve the feeling of leaving the body entirely, of floating above it, of looking down at the sleeping form from the ceiling, of drifting through the room with a freedom and weightlessness that the physical body can never achieve. These out-of-body experiences, reported throughout history and across cultures in accounts that have been given supernatural significance in many traditions, are among the most vivid examples of what the brain can construct when its usual methods of locating the self in space are disrupted. The neurological basis involves the brain's parietal and vestibular systems, the regions responsible for tracking the body's position and orientation in physical space, for maintaining the continuous, largely unconscious sense of where the self is and how the body is situated in its environment. During the transitions of sleep, and particularly during the disorienting overlap of sleep paralysis, these systems can misfire or become temporarily desynchronized from each other. The result is a spatial model of the self that conflicts with the body's actual location, a representation that places the experiencing center somewhere other than where the body lies. Researchers have deliberately induced similar experiences in waking subjects through electrical stimulation of the relevant cortical regions, demonstrating that the out-of-body sensation is not a perception of something genuinely occurring, but the brain's construction of a spatial experience in the absence of the consistent grounding information that normally keeps the self anchored to its body. For some dreamers, the experience carries fear, a sense of displacement, of wrongness. For others, it carries the particular quality of freedom that the dream of flight also offers. The feeling of the self released, briefly and impossibly, from the physical form that ordinarily contains it. Sleep inertia blurs memory of dreams within minutes. The window for capturing a dream upon waking is small and closes quickly. In the first moments after consciousness returns, the dream is still present, its imagery accessible, its emotional atmosphere still active, its narrative available to the reaching mind. But without something to anchor it immediately, it begins to dissolve. Within 5 minutes, significant portions of even the most vivid dream may be irretrievably gone. Within half an hour, the experience of having dreamed at all may have faded to a vague, unspecified feeling that something was happening, without any of its content remaining. This rapid dissolution is closely connected to a state called sleep inertia, the brief period of cognitive transition immediately following waking, during which the brain is still completing its shift from sleep mode processing to the full alertness of waking consciousness. During this transition, short-term memory is particularly fragile, and dream content, encoded during sleep in forms that are already less stable and less consolidated than waking memory, is among the first casualties of the shift. Studies have found that even a 30-second delay in beginning to recall a dream can cost a significant portion of its detail. The notebook on the bedside table is not a quaint habit. It is a genuine tool, one of the few interventions available that can reliably extend the window in which the dream remains recoverable. Writing even a single word, a name, a color, a feeling, before reaching for the phone or rising to begin the day creates an anchor that the rest of the dream can be pulled toward. The dream world is delicate, and it dissolves into waking consciousness the way a breath of warm air dissolves into a cold morning. Quickly, completely, and without leaving any trace of where it went. A consistent wake time increases dream recall reliability. Among all the practices that can improve a person's relationship with their own dream life, one of the simplest and most consistently supported by research is also one of the most frequently overlooked: waking at the same time every day. Not because it is a clever trick, but because it creates the one condition that makes everything else about dream recall easier: a predictable intersection between the moment of waking and the moment in the sleep cycle when the dreaming has been most vivid. When the sleep schedule is stable and consistent, the brain's architecture settles into a predictable rhythm. The extended REM periods of the final sleep cycles arrive at roughly the same point each night, and the moment of waking falls at roughly the same point in relation to them. Wake at the right time consistently, and you will consistently be waking from or near REM, and therefore consistently waking with material available to be remembered, rather than waking from a deep non-REM stage where the dreaming has receded far enough that nothing remains to catch. Irregular sleep disrupts this alignment. Waking too early cuts the extended REM periods short. Sleeping significantly later than usual introduces a grogginess that can obscure what was dreamed even when the timing is otherwise favorable. But a steady rhythm, maintained with reasonable attention, creates a reliable predictability that the dreaming mind can meet. People who commit to a consistent wake time often find that dream recall improves gradually and naturally over the course of weeks, without any other technique applied. The brain simply adapting to the expectation that at this particular moment each morning, something will be ready to be received. Sharing dreams with partners can increase closeness. There is something inherently intimate about sharing a dream. More intimate, perhaps, than most of what passes for personal disclosure in ordinary conversation. Because a dream, however strange its content, is a direct expression of the inner life at its least guarded. The concerns that waking social convention keeps carefully managed surface in dreams in their unfiltered form. The desires that daylight keeps contained appear in the dreaming hours without the editorial shaping that normally mediates self-presentation. The emotional life that is most deeply and authentically a person's own moves through the dreaming mind in ways that a partner given access to even fragmentary accounts of it receives something genuinely private. Studies examining the effects of dream sharing within intimate relationships have found consistent associations with increased feelings of closeness and emotional connection, effects that appear to arise through multiple pathways. The conversation that a shared dream opens often reaches emotional territory that more ordinary conversation does not naturally access, bringing into the daylight concerns and feelings that have been present but unspoken. The act of listening to a partner's dream and of attending to its imagery with genuine curiosity rather than dismissal is a form of care that people apparently recognize and value. It says, "The strange interior world you inhabit matters to me." Therapists who work with couples have observed that dream sharing can serve as a tool for reaching feelings and patterns of relating that more direct conversation sometimes cannot access. The symbolic distance of the dream providing a kind of safety that allows things to be said that might otherwise remain unsaid. To share a dream is to say, "Here is the private theater of my mind, running in the small hours when I have no control over what it shows. I trust you to sit in that theater with me, even when the show is strange." Most dream characters are familiar. Strangers are rarer than we think. The population of the dream world is drawn, far more consistently than most dreamers realize, from the actual population of the dreamer's life. Studies of dream reports collected systematically across many nights, and many participants find that the majority of dream characters are familiar ones. Family members, friends, colleagues, people encountered regularly or memorably in waking life, even when they appear in contexts that have nothing to do with the relationships in which they were originally known. The stranger in the dream, the figure whose face is unrecognized and whose identity carries no waking association, is less common than it subjectively seems. Research suggests that many of these apparently unfamiliar faces are not invented by the dreaming brain, but remembered from it. Seen briefly in a crowd, registered in a photograph, noticed in passing in a context that left no explicit memory, but that was sufficient to store a facial template in the brain's vast implicit archive of visual experience. The dreaming brain reaches into that archive when it needs to populate its world, and it finds, reliably, the faces that have actually been seen. This tendency points towards something meaningful about what dreaming is, at its most social and most human. The dream world is not a separate universe, populated by invented beings who have never existed anywhere. It is a reconfiguration of the social world that has actually been inhabited, a reshaping of real encounters, real relationships, real people glimpsed and known and sometimes barely noticed, assembled by the sleeping mind into new arrangements that serve whatever processing work the night requires. The cast of the dream is the cast of a life. We dream as we live among the people we have actually met. Even with all this, dreaming still keeps its best secrets. And so we arrive at the place where every long exploration of the dreaming mind eventually arrives. The edge of what is known, where the territory ahead is still unmapped and the best answers we have are still provisional, still debated, still waiting for the tools and the understanding that will eventually illuminate them more fully. We have covered, across this journey, an extraordinary range of what science has learned about dreaming, from the neurochemistry of REM sleep to the social simulation of dream characters, from the memory replay of sleeping rats to the color-changing skin of dreaming octopuses, from the reality checks of lucid dreamers to the communication that passes between sleeping and waking worlds through the medium of deliberate eye movements. Each of these findings is real, carefully established, worth knowing and worth carrying forward. Together, they constitute one of the most remarkable bodies of knowledge that science has assembled about any single aspect of human experience. And yet the question that matters most, the question of what it is actually like to dream, of what the dreaming experience truly is, and what it is ultimately for, remains at its core genuinely open. We can measure the brain waves. We can trace the eye movements. We can decode in blurry outline something of what the dreaming visual system is producing. We can communicate, briefly and crudely, with a dreaming mind that has found a way to signal its awareness from the inside. And still, the dream itself, the specific, personal, irreducibly interior experience of inhabiting a world that only you can see, remains beyond the reach of any method we currently possess. Perhaps this is appropriate. Perhaps the most intimate and the most personal of our experiences should retain, at their center, something that cannot be fully captured from the outside, something that belongs entirely to the person having it, something that the instruments of science can approach but never quite touch. The dream keeps its best secrets not because science has failed to look hard enough, but because some things about consciousness may require a different kind of looking than we have yet learned to do. Tonight, when sleep comes for you as it quietly and inevitably will, the dreaming mind will open its theater once again. Whatever plays there, whatever strange and vivid and emotionally real experience assembles itself behind your closed eyes, will be yours, entirely and unreachably yours. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful thing about it.